Today on Detroit Muscle, it's the start of a brand new project. The guys go on the hunt for their next big build and do some detective work to uncover the ideal candidate.
In recent months, we've combed the countryside looking for Detroit treasures, exploring boneyards and barns. We played detective by decoding cars to reveal their factory origins.
We've shared tips on how to look for project candidates. And mostly, we've just got a kick out of seeing what we could uncover.
But this time, we mean business. In fact, we're on a serious hunt for our next project vehicle.
Yeah, we've got word from a friend of a friend of a friend that's got several of those project cars, so we thought we'd come check him out. We came prepared. We got some cash in a trailer and hoping we'd go home with something.
Mark Tucker's Automotive Shop's in Lincoln County, Tennessee. Now, from the highway, you'd never know what lies behind it. A bevy of old beauties Mark has amassed over years of wheeling and dealing.
Well, I've been collecting probably around 17, 18 years.
Are any of these for sale?
Very, very few, mostly none of them.
Mark turned us loose in this maze of vintage metal, where it's fun to look, even though we're pursuing something special. Gotta watch your step here. There's patches of gnarly, prickly thistle everywhere.
Tom, did you know that the thistle is actually the national symbol of Scotland? In fact, according to a Scottish legend, some warriors were saved one night when their invaders, barefoot of course, stepped on thistle and, oh well.
Look at this. 57 Dodges were a symbol of what Chrysler once called the forward look. Kinda looks like it's moving, even though it's been parked here for years.
In the Spanish language, caliente means hot. This four-door sedan is, well, lukewarm at best.
Chevelle two-door wagons are pretty rare, and I bet Mark would even throw in the dice if we were game for another grocery getter.
Now, Mark has a special affinity for old trucks, and these rides are the ones he's least likely to let go of.
This 71 Plymouth Duster would make somebody a nice project car. Probably not us, but it's worth a look. Joe, is it rusty on that side?
I don't know. Well, Plymouth Satellite. This was in pretty good shape too. You know, this is considered an entry-level Mopar to a lot of people, and some people take these and try to turn them into something they're not, which is not very cool to us. If we get a Mopar, we're going top shelf. Something like this, 1970 Challenger RT, one of the most desirable, sought-after muscle cars in the world. Of course, some people would refer to this one as a basket case.
At first glance, it can be really intimidating, but the beauty behind buying a car in this style condition, well, some of the work of disassembly is already done, and you get to see exactly what the condition of the body is in. It's kind of like this shifter hole here. Now, I can tell you it looks like somebody's cut it out with a torch and a pair of vice grips, but it's no big deal, it can be repaired. But you would never see this with a shifter boot and the carpet laying in place.
Well, this old Challenger's missing an engine and trans, which is fine with us because we got plans we'll tell you about later. It's also missing a fender tag, which usually goes there, that tells you about all the options. Not to worry though, still got the VIN number, and that tells us a lot too. J's the letter designation for Challenger. This tells us it's the basic Challenger, not an RT, otherwise this would be an S. 2 and 3 tells us it's a two-door coupe. This next letter is for the engine type, a 318. 0 means 1970. B tells us it was assembled in Hamtramck, Michigan. And the last digits are sequential production numbers, which started at 100,001. Actually, this being originally a 318 car is pretty good news for us, because now there's nothing wrong with dropping in a big old bad, what's that iconic engine? Starts with an H, ends with an ME.
Now, this car being on a rotisserie is a huge help, especially with the inspection side of it. Now, looking at this car, it's got some rust in the trunk pan, which isn't no big deal. And I've heard from a few of those Mopar gurus, they almost think these cars were shipped from the factory with a little back here above the tank.
Well, a little rust like that's no big deal. A car like this, I'm kind of excited. What do you think?
Yeah, if the doors and fender is as nice as the car itself, we've got us a candidate. We'll just have to see if we can get it home today.
Let's go talk to him.
Getting the deal done was a lot easier than getting the Challenger out of the lot and onto our trailer. But at last, we're homeward bound with what promises to be our most exciting project ever.
Well, we made it back to the shop in one piece with our newly acquired 70 Challenger. Of course, it's in several pieces, and happy to say that the fenders and doors, like the rest of the body we showed you, are in great condition considering, well, they're almost 45 years old. Case in point, no rust at the bottom of this door, especially in the corner where you often find it in cars this old. And looks like original paint, too.
Another common problem are fender bottoms. Ours are in really good shape. The fender itself, well, it has a few dings and pop knots in it, but nothing's really bashed in. So a quick trip to the blaster and several of these components will be almost ready for paint. But before we can make that trip, well, we got to get the rest of the car stripped down. We'll start with the easy stuff, all the pieces that aren't attached and the accessible bits like the hood hinges. Everything we're removing is going to be gently laid out and accounted for. Some of this won't be reused, but a lot of it will, and you don't want to accidentally destroy a piece that can't be bought, especially you resto guys.
The steering column gets detached from the box, then a couple of bolts mean it can be removed. The dash is a little more involved, with some pretty tricky bolts to deal with. But like everything else, it comes out too. Then the heater box is an easy victim, as well as the pedal assembly.
Well, our deck lid here won't be making a trip to the blaster. The reason behind that is, well, it's a brand new part. So all we have to do is sand all this dust off, throw in a couple coats of primer, and then it'd probably be ready for a coat or two of paint. A little bit closer. This fuel cap is an iconic Mopar tidbit that we want to take really good care of. Oops, just a few screws is all it takes for removal. Good deal, saved it.
We are trying to label and organize most of the things we're going to reuse, like these headliner bows. The middle ones don't matter much, but the front and rear, due to the shape of the roof, got to go back the way they came. Some of these bolts are pretty stubborn and rusted, so we'll bust out a can of WD-40 rust penetrant to make removing them easier.
We'll use a jack to hold up the K-member, and 4 bolts is all it takes to drop it out of the car. Well, we got our control arms disconnected, the 4 bolts that hold the K-member out, and we went ahead and released all the pressure off the torsion bars. Now, oftentimes I've seen guys cut these out because they can be such a pickle to get out, but we're not going to do that today.
That's right. Theory is, if we push those torsion bars forward enough, the K-member and everything attached to it comes out. And to make that happen, my favorite tool, here you go.
Why are you handing it to me if it's your favorite tool? This side's out.
Now we can move on to the rear suspension. This leaf spring setup is a pretty familiar configuration for muscle cars. We'll unbolt the shackles on the back of them and knock them apart with a hammer. These super rad air shocks were a big deal back in 1983, but we don't think they'll be included in the rebuild. Then the front perch can be removed with 4 bolts, and the rear end is now detached from our Mopar.
Since we're about to head to the blaster, we'll put the body on a rotisserie to make moving it and blasting it a whole lot easier. We've made some special brackets to attach it to the car, and you'll probably have to do the same with pretty much any vehicle once you find a good attachment point.
Well, we got it on the rotisserie, so now we can roll it out and make a short trip to the blaster. You know, I'm gonna miss this Go Mango paint.
Hey guys, we're at Blast from the Past and you've seen us use them a number of times. We're dropping off our Dodge so that we can get it stripped down and ready for some color. But before we do all that, I'd like to talk about the media and its purpose. Now you all seen this fella, it's Vance. He's pretty much the head honcho here at the shop. I see you laid out a few of the medias. What do you got?
We've got some walnut shell, we've got some black beauty, and crushed glass.
Crushed glass.
These right here, the brown is the walnut shells. We use it on very light stuff like Corvettes, anything wood chairs, anything that needs something that's, you know, soft and delicate.
Now this stuff is cold slag, or what's referred to as black beauty, right?
Right, exactly.
So what do you guys use that for?
We use it on our rough material such as thick metal and stuff that we just want to rip the rust and paint off of right quick.
Now these other two are crushed glass. One's a number 4 and one's a number 3. And what the number refers to is how finely they're ground. Well, I guess we better get out of your way and let you get back to business, and I can find something to do.
Yeah, we got to get that thing finished.
All right, see you in a couple days.
Later, Gator.
And a couple days later, ours is back from the blaster. We've got a good bit of metal work ahead of us, including a roof replacement, but we expected that. You know, it's a funny thing, but we've had talks about what we like about the 1970 Dodge Challenger even before we got one. And we also talked about how we could make a great thing even greater. We like the unmistakable shaker hood option, and we like the fact that they were built to go fast, with engine options like the 440 and 426 Hemi. We also like the idea of a manual 4-on-the-floor trans with a pistol grip shifter, and the fact they came in such bright, crazy colors.
How could we improve from the original? How about taking that old school Hemi and slapping on some fuel injection, and then taking that cool pistol grip shifter and adding a couple gears with a 6-speed. We also want to upgrade the brakes and suspension of this ride by making it drive and ride like a modern performance car. And either way you're doing a ride like this, it's always a good idea to keep a clear picture of this thing in your mind or on paper. So here it is, thanks to this awesome rendering done by our friend Dale Swanson at Swanson Artworks, who does a lot of our pre-built art. The color's what the factory called Plum Crazy Purple in 1970. So we're proudly naming our project car Ultraviolet. He even gave us a personal slant on the classic RT stripes. So that's our game. Take the iconic parts of this car and ramp them up to the max.
But don't worry, we're keeping the classic looks and styling that make this car one of the most revered rides of the muscle car era.
Today on Detroit Muscle, our new Challenger project is about to flip its lid. We're taking the ratty, rusted roof off this old Mopar and replacing it with a pristine panel that's going to get rid of a huge amount of the holes on this thing.
Today on Detroit Muscle, we're on a Mopar mission as we bear down on our newest project ride, this 1970 Dodge Challenger. When we found it recently, the body was amazingly straight with little rust for its age. The stock 318 engine was gone, which was great considering our horsepower plans. So we wrote the check, hauled it home, and started the teardown, saving as many original parts as possible. We even had a rendering made of our vision of the final piece and gave it a name, Ultraviolet. Of course, we made a trip to the blaster before getting down to our first phase of real work.
We knew from the get-go we was going to have to do something regarding the rust on the roof of this car. Now from the factory, this thing came with a vinyl top, and back then they used to glue the vinyl straight to bare steel, which caused it to rust from the outside in. Now somebody could patch this roof up, but they'd spend a boatload of time doing it. And our car, well, really and truthfully, we could put a new panel on and be a better repair and a faster repair. Now you may be sitting there and being a little bit intimidated about cutting on the roof of a car, but after you see it done, probably gonna raise up your comfort level just a bit.
Well, this should raise your comfort level a lot. New replacement metal from Classic Industries. To get an idea of how all this goes together, kind of think of it as making a sandwich, with the A-pillars being the bottom bun, Drip rails being the bologna that goes in the middle, and for a top bun, this replacement roof skin. Well, we got to get rid of the leftovers first.
Those leftover Joe was just talking about, well, that's these rusty panels that have to come off. My first means of attack is using a shear bit inside of the air hammer, and then I'm going to follow all that up using a spot weld cutter.
The beauty of the shear bit is how it makes super quick work of that sheet metal. But if you're not careful, it can also be its drawback. Right now, we're just trying to cut the skin of the roof. We don't want to get into the structural pieces or the edge where the spot welds are.
Leaving a small strip still attached to the car with those spot welds, once I get all the way around the roof, the skin peels right off, kind of like an orange. With the majority of the roof out of the way, it's time to start working on all the little bitty spot welds on it. And to do that, we're going to use this spot weld cutter kit that we got from Matco. Now this thing comes with a couple different cutter blades on it, and it's also a 5/16 size. They make them in a couple different ones depending on the size of spot weld that you need to remove. I guess it's time for us to get started. With an automatic center punch, I'll make some pilot holes on each spot weld to help seat the cutter. Don't be tempted to use a drill bit to do this. The idea is to cut around the spot weld, not through it. A regular drill bit can also cut into the second layer, which you don't want.
With the chisel bit attached to our air hammer, we can now begin removing that metal that was held on by all those spot welds. Tommy is alternating between cutting spot welds and peeling off the metal with the air hammer. Like always, when you use the air hammer, be careful not to damage metal that you don't want to hammer away at.
The channel around the rear window is similar to the drip rails and front window channel. Drill out the welds, grab an air hammer, and go to town. Well, after digging into this roof repair, well, we noticed that some of the inner structures got some rot in it, and we're going to have to make some repairs. And it's going to involve slicing and dicing it up a bit, and we don't want the car to move around. So what we're going to do is add in some tubing to keep that from happening. It's not really all that big of a deal. We just got to do a little bit of welding.
These can be pretty much just nice solid tacks because they're going to get cut back off eventually. We'll use the principle of triangulation to add strength to our brace. After all, using triangles in structure is one of the oldest tricks in the book.
That's it.
Well, here is some of that rot that Tommy referred to, and it's in several places around the roof, but it's something you'd have to expect from a 45-year-old car. And it's something easily remedied with a little patchwork.
After marking the area that you want to cut out, with a cutting wheel on a grinder, the metal can be removed pretty easily. You want to cut a little bit outside of where the rod is, but don't get too crazy. You just make a bigger hole, that will mean more work.
A sanding disc is useful to help dress the area where the new panel will be welded in. And once we've replicated the curvature and shape of the old one, we can begin fitting it. Since this part of the car isn't flat, you'll want to tack the piece and shape the metal to fit. Once it's laid down flush with the stock panel, you can tack it in the rest of the way and begin welding it in for good.
Maybe wondering why I cut this off here instead of leaving it one long piece. Well, I've got to replace this A-pillar and I don't want to be fighting it, so I just went ahead and sliced it and we'll fix it later. Once it's welded in, we'll dress the welds with a grinder and then repair the rest of the bad spots.
Coming up, we'll continue the roof replacement on our Challenger with an A-pillar swap and drip rail install.
Well, with the patch panels in place on the roof skeleton, we can get back to the original mission, which is replacing all the sheet metal. Now, the next piece of the puzzle is the bottom bun of that sandwich we talked about earlier, the A-pillar. Now, we got to drill out some spot wells like we did on the roof earlier on this thing. Then we'll take it off, clean things up, and install the new piece. By the way, this A-pillar from Classic Industries is as close to the original gauge steel as you can get. Now, you might find one that's cheaper, but it's not going to be as durable.
I'll start the removal process by making a couple of marks on the inside of the A-pillar, which I won't be removing, and then measure from those marks to the 90-degree spot on the A-pillar part that I will be cutting off. This will become important in locating the new piece. I'll show you how in a minute.
Now we want to get rid of all those A-pillar spot welds. And here's why you need sharp spot weld cutter bits for this job. In some places, you're going through a single layer, the top one, to get the pillar off. But in others, like on the cowl, you're cutting through 3 layers of steel.
We'll work our way up from the bottom to the top, drilling spot welds as we go.
This spot weld on the roof brace really shows how these cars were put together. Here you see the roof brace top skin, the A-pillar, and the structural layer of the roof brace all meeting in one place and spot welded together.
In case you were wondering why I'm slicing up this material, well, it's because there are panels buried under the other panels. So it's easier to cut and remove small pieces than trying to take it out as one big one. Anything that's left over, well, the air hammer can make pretty quick work of it. Come on, baby.
We need to attack the area with a grinding wheel. This will make a nice and smooth mating surface for the new outer A-pillar. Next, we need to lay down a coat of Loctite Extend Rust Preventive on all the bare metal. When it reacts with the rust and stops it, you'll know because it turns purple.
With the rust treated, now we're ready to start fitting the A-pillar. Once I got it in place, I'm going to make a few marks so I can punch some holes in it for the plug welds. Then we'll be ready to weld this thing up and this calf will be roped. With the pillar in place, I can make a few marks for the holes that need to be put for the new spot welds. Then I'll grab our Matco metal punch and make some holes till them cows come home. Now, if you remember earlier, I made me a mark on here to give me a reference point, and what that tells me is how close this piece is to the edge of the glass, kind of in a way. Because with the A-pillar being replaced on this side and that side, if they both were in, let's say 1/8 of an inch, well, that's 1/4 inch too tight, and you can run into trim and glass fitment issues. Well, it looks like we're a little bit better than a 1/16 off from what we were earlier. So tap or two with a hammer. One more time, I think we'll have it. Are in place, a little bit of grinding will dress them up and flatten them down just like they need to be. Once all that's done, our new A-pillar is installed. Pretty excited about the whole deal. What do you guys think? Perfect.
Well, now that the A-pillar work is behind us, we can start giving this Challenger a roof using those replacement parts we showed you earlier. Because of alignment issues, the roof skin's got to go on before the drip rail.
Go ahead and get on up top. That's pretty good. Just need a clamp.
I think this thing's going to fit. The drip rail goes here under the roof skin, which, like I said, we'll use to locate the rail in its new home. A couple of tacks from the bottom side are a handy way to keep the rail in place after you pull the skin back off. You have to do that in order to access the top of the rail to place the spot welds.
With the roof skin back in place, we can finally start getting it welded back to the car. There's just a few spot welds here, then a few more here, and a few more right over here.
Once those are burned in, you can cut those tacks off the bottom. Now, you don't have to address these welds. Nobody's going to see them, but that's up to you.
Well, we jumped one of the biggest hurdles as far as a sheet metal repair on our Challenger today. And really and truthfully, it didn't take all that much time considering the panel that we just replaced.
I'll tell you one thing, Tom, it's one major step of many on our road to creating the ultraviolet Challenger.
Today on Detroit Muscle, it's a major modification for our 1970 Dodge Challenger G machine that we call Ultraviolet. We're swapping out the factory K-member for an all-new, all-modern full frame that's going to make this Mopar handle like it's on rails.
Our 1970 Dodge Challenger project, lovingly dubbed Ultraviolet, is still in its early stages. After we tore it down in the shop, saving all the hard-to-find pieces, we removed the chewed-up old roof skin and replaced it with a new one. With some, but not all, of the metal patching work done, we're going to switch gears.
When we did the teardown, we also removed all the factory suspension out from under this car. Now, oftentimes you guys see us take a few of those, beef them up a bit, and make some improvements on them. But with this car, we're going to come at it at a little bit of a different angle, and I bet it's going to surprise a few of you.
If you know your muscle cars, you know these Dodge Challengers came from the factory with a unibody setup. They utilized a front subframe with torsion bars, and well, we could upgrade the suspension and keep the subframe if we wanted to go that route. But technology has come a long way in 45 years, so I think we ought to take advantage of it. Check this. This is what we'll be using to give that Dodge 21st century handling. It's a G-Machine chassis from Schwartz Performance. With about 20 grand and 2 days of work, you can convert your unibody pony car into a full frame setup. Well, now I want you to meet the guy behind all this technology, Jeff Schwartz. You know, I know there's a lot of science in this setup. How's it going to change the driving characteristics of our Challenger?
Well, Joe, it's going to ride like a high-end luxury car and handle like a sports car. Starting at the outside moving inward, we have the 14-inch Extreme Plus brakes. These are manufactured by Behr for Schwartz Performance. The rotors are 14-inch diameter. The calipers are a 6-piston design and a very rigid structure.
Schwartz manufactures a custom steel spindle that's designed to withstand the combined stress of G-machine turning and muscle car weight. It bolts to a billet aluminum steering arm that they also manufacture. One cool feature is this adjustable bump stop that helps keep those oversized tire combos from chewing up the inner fenders.
When Jeff was talking about it riding like a luxury car, here's why. These 16.5-inch shocks have a ton of travel, which of course improves the ride. But there's a performance advantage to this as well.
This longer suspension travel also helps in a handling situation. If you're going around a corner and you encounter a bump, if you have very short suspension travel, the car will lose adhesion, the tire will lose contact with the road surface, and the car will actually slide across the surface of the pavement. With longer shock travel, you encounter a bump while cornering, the shock absorber will absorb the bump and the tire will still stay planted on the ground. Our upper control arms have needle bearings with grease fittings. This offers a nice smooth ride quality with no deflection.
The shafts are slotted on the top so that you can adjust caster without using shims. The chassis also comes with a race-bred tubular sway bar. They're attached with billet end links and nylon line rod ends to keep you from having any bind issues.
The rack and pinion steering pivot is in line with the lower control arm pivot. So what does this do? Well, it goes a long way in getting rid of bump steer.
Well, Jeff, tell me something about this G-Machine chassis going under our car.
Well, Joe, it's constructed from 2x3-inch mandrel bent tubing, and it bolts into the structural areas of the unibody without any floor cutting.
Well, like up front, I see you got the racing style sway bar back here. What about some of these other suspension components, though?
Well, we've got a triangulated 4-link rear suspension. It uses nylon lined spherical rod ends. And again, that is for bind-free operation. It allows the rear end to articulate and gives you a smooth luxury car ride with awesome handling. All of our chassis come with a Moser differential. In this case, we used an aluminum third member, the billet Daytona bearing, and a large 1350 billet yoke.
Using a 9-inch Ford-style rear like this has been a mainstay of performance for decades, even in Chevys and Mopars, because of their combination of strength and ease of servicing. But they do contain a weakness when it comes to the modern G-Machine style events that a lot of enthusiasts participate in. No big deal, there's a great way to get around that problem.
From day one, our chassis have featured a full floater rear end. What that means is the axle floats within the rear end. It's got large diameter tapered roller bearings here, and this drive plate mates with the axle. This drive plate is what turns the hub and the wheel. The advantage of a full floater rear end is in a normal Ford 9-inch, there's a wetting ring, and that wetting ring will press off the axle due to the G-forces that this chassis generates. And that'll cause pad knockback issues, and you have a potential for brake failure.
Okay, and you avoid that with this setup. Well, very interesting. It's a good design. Looks good on the stand, but it's not going to do us any good till we get the body in the air. Jeff says that one of the first questions people ask him is, how much weight will this full frame add to the car?
It actually deducts weight from the car by getting rid of the heavy components such as leaf springs, cast iron steering gearbox, the Pitman arm, center link, etc. You actually reduce the weight of the car by about 50 to 75 pounds depending on the application.
In order to be able to get the frame under there, the rotisserie needs to be detached from the Dodge and get rolled away. Here you go. Now we're going to have to go ahead and modify some of the front frame rails here just a bit to get the chassis to fit. Now we're not going to have to cut into the floor pans, which that's a pretty good little deal. But we are going to have to cut the rear rails just a small bit to make it all work great. And after he gets all marked up here, the sparks are going to fly.
Since our chassis rail is going to fit in the same location as the original rail and our front rail will bolt into the core support, we're going to have to remove this rail, and we'll be cutting along this line up around the shock tower and then down along the back here. By eliminating the shock tower and with our rack and pinion steering, you'll have lots of room for headers and large engines.
Since the whole front half of the frame is going to get chopped out, we're going to tack in some braces to keep the integrity of the inner fenders and radiator support. We're also going to remove that shiny new chassis so that we don't damage it with sparks. Then we'll bust out the cutting tools and start making some room. Now this isn't just a little surface metal job. There's more to it than that.
There are several layers of metal to deal with here, so you'll probably find yourself making several passes with a few different cutting tools. Reciprocating saw, plasma, cutting wheel, they might all make an appearance.
We'll need to make room for the shock tower on the new frame. So with a template in its shape, we'll mark out the rest of the inner fender that has to be clearanced out. An electric grinder with a cutting wheel is a good choice here. to make a nice, clean cut.
Well, now that the front of the frame's been properly located on the core support, time for the next step, and that's to make marks on the factory torsion bar cross member, cut a couple of slots, and then weld up these heavy-duty plates. The cutting wheel is also a good choice for this surgery, since we want the cuts to uniformly butt up against the plates once they're installed. To get to the spots the wheel can't reach, we'll use a body saw.
Then it's on to some of the brackets in the rear, which will interfere with the frame fitment. Drill out a couple spot welds, then get after it with an air hammer. A little grinding will clean up in preparation for the next step.
And that would be making a small pie slice in the rear frame rail. With that piece taken out, the side of the rail can be moved outward to make room for the new one, which is coming in.
Now Jeff just made a relief cut on this forward side of the rail for his chassis. Now we're also going to make a little bit of clearance room on this shock brace for the shock brace on his G-Machine chassis. So a little bit of burp saw, a whole lot of noise, we'll be a step closer. Now remember, there are two of these that have to be removed on each side.
Hey, while you were gone, Tom welded and dressed up the frame rails that were narrowed in the back. And he also capped off the front frame rails that were removed. Now, you don't want to leave those open. It looks bad, makes it weaker, and it's a nice trap for moisture and debris. Well, here are those plates we showed you earlier, loosely bolted up to the Schwartz Performance frame. They're going to slide up into place in those slots we cut out of the torsion bar cross member. And there are shims between the plates and frames that measure 15 thousandths. And the idea of that is to make fitment a lot easier once they're being installed.
First, we'll bolt in the front horns of the frame to the radiator support. Then we'll fasten the rear of the frame in some newly located holes on the existing frame rails.
In the holes where the front of the leaf springs used to bolt up, a set of plates are bolted to the car, then welded to the mounting plates on the new frame. The same thing will take place on the torsion bar cross member, where we made those cuts earlier to make room for both a chassis and mounting plate. Then, to strengthen the car even further, we'll go ahead and stitch weld the entire cross member to the floor pans, which were originally only held in by spot welds.
We're almost to the finish line of installing our chassis. The next step is installing this optional brace. You want to make sure to attach it to the firewall using a footing plate. Now we're only tacking this thing into position because we need to make sure that we have proper wheel clearance. We may end up having to move it to the inside, so we'll just have to check that and see where it goes.
Those temporary wheels on our Dodge mean that we've accomplished our goal for today, making this thing a roller by the end of the day. And I think this Schwartz Performance chassis installation was easier and, well, less painful than even we anticipated.
And considering how much this is going to improve the handling of this old Dodge, I tell you, this is a no-brainer for those of you who want to get the most out of your muscle car. And one more thing, the old Mopars back in the day had the engine and tranny offset to the passenger side.
Yeah, the guys at Schwartz kept the offset and built motor mounts and a transmission cross member to match it. Pretty handy. And it's going to help us when we get to work on that transmission tunnel for the big 6-speed we're going to install.
It also allows us to go ahead and drop in our plastic engine for mock-up. Now this is a Pioneer block that we got from Summit Racing. These things have a boatload of reasons why to use them. One of them, well, you can set it in and out of place by hand, and it could save you an engine because you don't want to fill one of those expensive ones full of grinding sparks.
And that officially winds up our project for today. And Jeff, can't thank you enough for your help on this thing.
No problem. I can't wait to see you guys driving this on the road. And remember, drive it like you stole it.
Okay, we'll let you drive it too. Looks great, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Today on Detroit Muscle, it's a plan for the pan as our crew steamrolls through a trunk pan replacement for our 1970 Challenger Ultraviolet. We'll go super in depth so that you can address this common problem in your own garage.
Project Ultraviolet, our 1970 Dodge Challenger resto mod, is nearing the next phase. After replacing the roof and putting a high-end full chassis under it, we're ready to finish off the sheet metal work.
Now we've got most of it knocked out, including getting the quarter patched. Now the doors and fenders, well, they were in pretty good shape, so we went ahead and hosed on a couple coats of primer. But there are a couple of issues that need to be addressed. And one of those, well, that's the trunk pan. When we got this car, we knew it was in need of some attention. That's one big reason to get a car blasted if you're going for a high-end build, because it revealed the true extent of the damage. It's pretty rotten and probably beyond trying to save.
There are some spots on this car where we can simply make patch pieces to fill in the holes. Since that trunk pan is beyond the patching point though, we're gonna outright replace it. And to make that happen, we'll use this replacement piece we got from Classic Industries. You can use the entire trunk floor or use sections of it depending on the damage of what you're replacing.
Now we're not going to use the entire panel for our application, and there's a couple of reasons why. Well, originally this floor goes up and under the tail panel, and to put it in, we'd have to remove it. Also, the pan is so wide, well, either the quarter would have to come off or the tail panel itself just to slide it in as one big unit. So we're going to end up cutting it down the middle on the new part, which, after a little bit of body work, you'll never know it. To start with, laying out a roadmap for your cutting is a good idea. You want to pay attention to several things. Where are the braces under the pan? What parts of the factory pan are going to stay in the car? And where are the spot welds that will have to be cut for removal?
You know, Tommy, we could make a lot faster business of this if we use the plasma cutter instead of a saw, I guess.
Yeah, but being slow and true is sometimes better, right?
What? This is exactly the kind of thing that the body saw was made for. So if you've got one, it'll be super handy for a project like this. Be sure to cut shallow when you go over the top of the braces so you don't cut into them as well. Now that was a lot of cutting, but we're ready to move on to the next job, which is what?
That's going to be drilling out a whole bunch of spot welds, so I'm sure you want to be a part of that, right?
I want to be a part of taking a break.
Just like when we swapped the roof skin on this car, the trunk pan has its fair share of spot welds to keep it married to the framework. Use a spot weld cutter on the ones that are attached to the braces so that you don't accidentally punch through the brace. There's still a little metal that has to be cut out. These things don't just fall out by themselves. An air hammer is another handy tool to have for removing one of these pans. Like with your cutting tools though, this thing is pretty aggressive, so don't mess up your braces while you're removing the sheet metal. Well guys, we've been making some pretty good progress here in the trunk, but we still got a ways to go. I'm gonna have to take the body saw and rip right across through here to get this big chunk out of the way, and then follow up with some more spot weld drilling to get this piece off the tub.
We're swapping out the spot weld cutter for a 3/8 drill bit so that we can make a pilot hole for the body saw. Since we don't want to slice through an additional bottom layer of metal here, we'll switch to the cutting wheel to finish the cut.
Inside the tub, a 1/4-inch Ken-Cut drill bit will make some good pilot holes to drill out these spot welds. Then back to the 3/8 bit. We can use a regular bit here since it's okay to punch through both layers. With all that stuff out of the way, well, it's time to do some grinding here on the spot welds and some hammer dolly work to straighten this stuff out.
The flatter you can get the surface in these spots, the better your new panel will attach to the braces. A uniform surface allows the new metal to lay down correctly when it's time to plug weld the pieces in. In addition, a little hammer and dolly work will straighten the edges back out. Then they get grinded too.
Still ahead, get in your Zen zone because we'll show you how patient trimming can give your trunk pan a perfect fit. We'll even include a secret technique for butting the edges.
We're getting really close to installing our replacement trunk floor, but before we do, check out the rust inside those rails back here. Now, we're going to be covering them up real soon, so this is our only chance to take care of that rust. Well, we got it. And that's what this Loctite Extend Rust treatment is all about. This is a little bit of insurance, and this is the time to use it since that metal will never see the light of day again. At this point, the majority of the factory metal that needed to go is out of here, so we're about ready for that replacement piece from Classic Industries. How do we get going on that now?
Well, first of all, like Joe mentioned, since we left a portion of it, I've got to do a little bit of measuring to see exactly where I need to cut that new panel. Our first point of measurement is going to be here at the bottom of this little stamping to where we sliced it. You want to make sure to measure it in 2 different spots so that both of them are square. That's 1.5 inches. Also on the new piece, we want to come back and cut it a little bit high on the top of this little stamping ridge so that we can come back and file fit it, if you will, so that'll give us a little extra metal to work with. Now we got to transfer all that information to our new panel, and it's pretty much straightforward. 1.5 inches here and 1.5 inches here. Now I'll place some nice little dots around the perimeter where we want to start making our cut. Then some masking tape will give me an easy to see edge to cut up against. And then that good old body saw. It's seeing some action today for sure. Don't forget the corners. Well, all right, guys, I know we mentioned earlier about cutting this thing in half because it wouldn't fit, but we're going to give it a shot just to see, because if it does fit, it'll save us a little bit of time. Whoop, getting closer. Well, now we got to do a little trimming. That saved us a bunch of work. Well, it's still hitting right here in the middle, so we're going to have to kind of notch out around that and then do a little more trimming on this excess. But it's better to make sure that you cut it too long than too short, because it's easier to trim it up than trying to stretch this thing.
Taking a look at where it's binding up, a few marks will tell us where additional cuts need to be made. Like we said, that body saw is carrying the bulk of the cutting. But if you don't have one, a good cutting wheel can do a lot of this for you. Some hairy spots might require something else, like tin snips. A little extra trimming can also be done with the pan in the car. Now,
oftentimes whenever you get new sheet metal, it's very close but not dead on. Right here in the middle of this curve, the little lip that turns down that welds into the corner, well, that's actually at an angle, so we need to take it back out and hammer it square, if you will, so that whenever it slides into place, it'll go straight down instead of digging into the wheel tub. A dolly on the backside will help keep the edges straight and also makes the process go a little faster since you can put pressure on it from the backside as well. Since the corner is wanting to crinkle up, we'll have to make a relief cut to let the two pieces overlap slightly. And back in the car again. That fits a whole lot better now. And we still got to do a little bit more trimming down here on the end to let this thing lay on down. But don't get discouraged whenever you're doing something like this, because it takes several tries to keep trimming and trimming to get that piece just where it needs to be. Now, if you just took it and threw it in the hole and nailed it in place, as they say, well, there ain't enough seam sealer and undercoating to make this thing look like much from the top or the bottom side.
Like Tom said, properly fitting one of these panels might take a lot of trial and error, in addition to placing it and removing it from the car quite a bit. But a proper repair can't be rushed.
Stick around for the proper placement procedure for those plug welds that'll hold in the new pan.
Well, we are back to finish up the trunk floor transplant on our Dodge Challenger. Those clamps we added underneath got the replacement piece all located properly. However, they also added some extra tension, particularly back here. So we're going to add a couple of Clecos, one back here, one up front, remove the clamps and move on. Using an 1/8" bit, we'll punch through the top and bottom layer to put in the Clecos. These things are a staple of panel replacement, allowing you to attach panels to the car, but leaving the option to move them around if need be. Oh, and watch those clamps when they come off.
I got a tip I want to show you that I use for fitting these panels nice and tight. What I do is, using an air saw, is I'll actually slice into here and then run uphill just a bit and then all the way across. And what that does is that allows me to cut through both pieces, giving me
inside the lines that Tommy drew that represent the width of each rail. We know that each lip on each rail measures 3/4 of an inch. So if we get right in the middle of that mark, we'll be on the money. I'm going to start with an 1/8" pilot hole, followed by a 3/8 bit, large enough to do some plug welding and get this thing in place. After that, we'll jump up to a 3/8 bit to finish out these holes. The ones along the edge are easier to deal with. We'll bust out our hole punch and let it do its thing.
Well, all right, guys, we're to the point we can start melting some wire. I'm going to tack weld it on this side and work it all the way across. Remember, this is tacking, not welding, in case you have to move it around some more. This gap between the two panels is what you're looking for. This one back here, well, it's too tight. So you just simply take that body saw, run back through it, and it'll open it up and give you the perfect amount of gap for your weld.
Still ahead, it's the floor finale as we finish off this sizable stern surgery to complete our trunk transformation.
While you were gone, I went ahead and finished tacking the back seams of the new pan. I had to do a little more trimming to make it fit, but that's no big deal. I'm also having Joe hold a pry bar to push the metal down so I can do the first few plug welds, AKA rosette welds. Well, all right guys, we got our panel tacked into position and we're ready to start doing the rosette welds. Now, sometimes those things can be a little bit tricky, so you need to spend some time and get your welder dialed in just right. And also a tip for you is make sure both the panels are sandwiched as tight as possible, and that'll help a bunch.
Oh, I'm sure enjoying myself holding that pry bar, but it's pretty important to keep the pan held down against the surface of the brace for a good weld. There's a lot of these rosette welds that have to be done to get the pan attached. Good thing Tom fits so well into tight spaces, right?
Well, all right guys, we got all the rosette welds done. Now we just need to finish welding right here across the tail pan where we made our incision. Then after that, we'll have to do a little bit of grinding, but it's gonna look like $1,000,000 when we're all done. Now, just like if you were welding on a body panel like a door or a fender, this metal is pretty thin, so you have to be careful to avoid doing too much at once so that you don't warp it. I'll break out the big electric grinder to dress everything up real pretty. That includes both the rear seam and the rosette weld.
Once it's done, you can see the huge difference that putting in a new pan has made. And we didn't even have to body work it since it went in pretty well.
Well, all right guys, we're pretty much done. All we really need to do is spray on some primer, but we'll do that whenever we prime the entire car. And this repair turned out really nice. And after all, that's what you want to see. A good repair is almost invisible.
Today on Detroit Muscle, it's the return of our purple pavement pounder, Project Ultraviolet. This 1970 Challenger is getting its new power plant built with an all-aluminum old-school Hemi. Plus, we slip in a 6-speed and do a budget valve cover refurb.
After tearing down our 70 Challenger, we gave it a new roof replacement skin. Then after a few modifications, we installed a complete G-Machine full frame setup from Schwartz Performance. More surgery was required out back. In fact, we removed most of the old trunk floor and replaced it with new metal from Classic Industries. And since you saw it last, we sprayed the body with red oxide epoxy primer. That brings us to this, filling that engine bay with a perfect power plant for our Ultraviolet Challenger. And we think this old Mopar, well, it needs a Hemi. But this isn't just any old Hemi. This is one of the first low-deck B-block Hemis ever made. And old Joe, he's on his way to go pick us one up. That is after they machine it, build it, and test it up at Indy Cylinder Head.
If it's got a Chrysler engine under the hood, chances are all or part of it came from Indy Cylinder Head, a company whose name is synonymous with Mopar high performance. They've been in business here since the early 1970s. The company found its true calling years later, all thanks to an underserved bunch of Dodge and Plymouth guys.
We got to making parts and filling the void of where Chrysler kind of left off, and it just took off from there.
Their first head developed for the Chrysler 440 was an overnight success, but Russ Flegel knew that satisfying Hemi hunger would soon follow.
In the Chrysler person's mind, all of them wanted to have a Hemi. It's just at that point in time, they couldn't afford it, and there wasn't parts out there to buy. Today, I sell as much Hemi stuff as I do 440.
Nowadays, Indy can build them from mile to wild. No matter what the power goal is, though, all of their crate engines begin life here. Well, here is our low deck Hemi block, fresh from the foundry, where it's been cast and heat treated according to Indy Cylinder Head specs. Now, all ready for some critical machine work. The first machining process on the front and back of the block is the most critical.
We regard the 2 bell housing dowel pins and the 2 timing chain dowel pins. That's what we locate everything from. Everything comes from those 4 dowel pins. Now to finish it, we locate these 2-inch thick plates on either end of the block, bolt them to it, off of the dowel pins, and then we shoot the main line and we shoot the cam tunnel.
For years, B blocks have been used for 383 and 400 cubic inch Mopars. Adapting one for the Hemi is a big breakthrough.
This block being made on the B block format, low deck, it allows more clearance. It gives you another 1/2 inch of clearance where there is no clearance. It makes putting headers on, getting valve covers off, getting spark plugs out of it. It just makes the whole thing a whole lot easier.
Here's a nice touch. Torque specs stamped right here on the deck. In the meantime, this machine is busy CNCing our aluminum cylinder heads. They're basically better flowing stock replacements that perfectly match our street performance goal. Skilled human hands are still needed to cut the valve seats in the heads, to produce the private label rocker arms, and to assemble the valves and springs. Meanwhile, here's our low deck Hemi bottom end already put together. The cam from Comp's already been degreed in. In fact, they're ready to finish it. But before they do, let's talk to Kenny Lazzari about what they put inside this thing already.
We're going to use an Eagle 4340 steel crank, and then we're going to use an Eagle H-beam rod. This is a diamond piston, 10.3 to 1. This is a conventional tall deck Hemi piston, same cubic inches. You can see how much shorter the low deck Hemi is, and it also saves 300 grams.
Kenny's installing a new Milodon low-profile oil pan on our Hemi. It's got a windage tray, trapdoor, and baffles.
On this particular engine, we're not going for all-out horsepower. We want something that makes good torque. We want it to be a good engine that's going to live for a long time, do good RPM, good horsepower.
Underneath those twin fast throttle bodies is one of Indy's Modman intakes, which required a new design to work with our B block.
It's a very versatile manifold, but in this particular case, we had to make one because the manifold had to be narrower than what the RB block was.
Now we're ready to top off this good-looking engine with a pair of valve covers. This CNC machine is putting on some finishing touches. Words that convey these are for a special engine for a special muscle car. Next morning, time to hear some elephant motor noise down at the dyno. First fire up, and our low deck Hemi sounds great already. After setting a few parameters, the fast program lets Kenny know everything's hooked up correctly, and instantly it starts learning all about the engine. .558 horsepower at 6,300 RPM. 491 foot-pounds at 5,200. And on a final follow-up run, the numbers were almost identical.
As far as safe maximum power, it's right on the money. If you wanted to adjust it, you would look at your idle and drivability, but that's got to be done in the car, hood closed, driving down the road.
It's time to haul our Hemi back home. That is, after a brief stop at the scales. This combination has never been weighed before. Look at that, only 491 pounds. That's 50 less than a small block Chevy.
Oh, you're back out.
Well, that's a wrap, at least for our visit here. Gotta head back and introduce the stout low deck Hemi to our ultraviolet Challenger.
Still ahead, we carve out a tranny tunnel for a big bad 6-speed and install a hydraulic clutch for that smooth actuation.
Well, we made it back with our new low-deck Hemi, and it looks good on this engine stand, but it's going to look a lot better in that Challenger, don't you think so, Tom?
Yes, sir, I do believe so. Well, we wanted to make sure whatever transmission we dropped into that thing, well, it'd be strong enough to handle all that power. So we decided to go with a T56 Magnum from American Powertrain. Now, this thing's considerably stronger than your just run-of-the-mill, plain old T56. It can withstand 700 foot-pounds of torque. Another deal is when you shift into 5th and 6th, well, they're overdrive with a final ratio of 0.63 to 1. And with that aluminum case, she's nice and light. They also sent us this QuickTime bell housing. Now, this is the strongest steel bell housing on the market. Now, these things, well, you can use them for everyday use, or let's say you want to carry it to the track to ring it out. As for a shifter, well, we went with the White Lightning unit from American Powertrain. It has 60 different positions to it, so you can adjust it to whatever's comfortable for you. And then the cherry on the top will be this pistol grip. Now, I tell you what, you don't get much more Mopar than that right there.
Our T56 is a little bit larger than most transmissions would be dropping into this Challenger. So first off, we're going to have to do some modifications to the tranny tunnel. Now, for mock-up purposes with our transmission, we don't want to hurt the Hemi, so we're relying on our plastic Pioneer block from Summit.
Now, normally we just kind of whittle away at a transmission tunnel to just get that transmission to fit. But this one here, well, it's had some modifications done to it that need to be addressed. So we're just going to cut this entire thing out and start from fresh. I'll start with a pilot hole to get us going. Then it's our good old buddy, the body saw. I'll be removing this metal in sections. Since there's a brace right below this floor pan that the body saw blade isn't long enough to cut through. Now that brace will have to be cut to allow clearance for the transmission, but I'll be using a reciprocating saw to make that happen. After the middle section is cut out, the leftover edges of the brace need to be cut at an angle to keep them from interfering with the trans. Now we'll do the first test fitment of our bell housing. If we can get it to fit, then the transmission itself should be fine. Looks like we need to go ahead and cut all the way up to the firewall. Still not enough room? No problem. Trimming off these little ears and knocking some of the floor pan back will help make it work. Almost there. There's a little bit left to trim on the firewall and then a little more on the floor. Now I can bolt it in and it has enough room to wiggle. Well, we got our transmission in place, so that means we got a plenty big enough hole. We got just the right amount of clearance. Now I need to do some tin work to patch up that hole.
Up next, we'll demystify the world of hydraulic clutches, and then it's a low buck valve cover refurb.
With the stock tunnel whittled out to fit our 6-speed, we grabbed some 18-gauge steel and tossed it into the slip roller to make a new one. Once it was formed to the proper shape, we burned it into place. Then we made a couple of small pieces to fill in the gaps. Now, onto the clutch.
Well, we not only have the components, we got the man who brought them, Gray Frederick from American Powertrain. And hey, good to see you again.
Good to see you too.
It's been a long time. It's a cool setup. Let's first talk about this atomic twin clutch setup. That looks pretty cool. American made, right?
Yes. We're having a lot of really high-powered engines go in front of our transmissions. And we have the atomic twin, which is really unique. It actually hits one disc at a time. So it's very smooth, like a single disc clutch instead of being like an on-off switch, but it'll handle an awful lot of power. And with the engine that's going in this car, we felt like this was the appropriate clutch for the job.
Yes, sir. 558 horsepower.
Yeah.
Now, we won't be installing the clutch right away, of course, but we will be mocking up the pedals and, of course, this Hydromax. Now, I guess you have a lot of questions about what this thing really is.
Man, we actually do probably 60 or 70% hydraulic clutch systems now. A lot of guys are getting away from the mechanical systems. And there are a lot of questions about them, but They're really pretty simple. You got a master cylinder, and this part actually just goes on the firewall. You have a hose going down to this thing. This is the hydraulic slave or hydraulic throwout bearing, and it works a lot like a brake caliper. Just fill it with fluid, push on the master cylinder, and it pushes on the fingers of the clutch. Very simple.
And of course, you guys also furnish the pedals, which is pretty handy for a Mopar guy in his project.
Yeah, we actually make these E-body pedals along with B and A body pedals. When people call us for a transmission, we pretty much have to be able to provide everything or they can't put a transmission in. So we try to fill the market with anything that the market has run out of, like original Mopar pedals.
I know you're using these on your Coronet project. How's that coming?
Oh man, it's coming great. We got the paint on, we got the transmission in, the suspension. One of the things that's handy about having my own Mopar, we like to do a lot of testing on our own cars before we send parts out to customers.
Well, that makes us feel better. Let's get these things mocked up.
All right.
With the pedals installed in the stock pedal box, it's a simple matter of slipping them into place under the dash.
Hey, Gray, I got a question for you.
All right.
You pull this little pin out of the pedal assembly before you put them in. Why?
Well, this thing actually would be where the original clutch rod would go, but since we're using hydraulics, we get rid of that and put the hydraulic rod there.
Don't need it?
Nope.
Gone.
All right.
Next question. The master cylinder itself, this bracketry is something you guys came up with. What's the deal on that?
Yeah, we call this Hydromax bracket, and it's actually patented. This thing does two things really well. Number one, it gives you the same clutch rod angle as your original clutch rod, so all the ratios between your pedal and the rod stay the same. Gives you a very comfortable clutch. The other thing that this does is keep this rod here going straight into the master cylinder so that it doesn't scrub the seals and ruin the master cylinder.
That would ruin it. Well, let's put it in.
All right.
There's a little bit of clearancing that needs to happen with the carbide bit to make the master cylinder fit, but it's really pretty negligible. 2 bolts will hold it in place once it's installed. Then a hole needs to be drilled on the lever part of the clutch pedal. There's a threaded piece of steel that attaches to the master cylinder. Then a Heim joint attaches to that hole we just drilled. And voila, a working clutch pedal. Well, mock-up mission is complete. Won't be long before we're ready for paint and final assembly. I bet you could help us with that.
I'd be glad to come back.
Okay, I'm gonna count on it.
A classy set of valve covers goes a long way toward dressing up your engine bay. Now, you can buy a new set of these wrinkle finish retro MTs for $150. But guess what? This one's not new. In fact, it looked just like this one when we picked them both up for $25 at a swap meet. Now, the best part is you can pull this trick off yourself in your own home shop. Watch. First thing to do is get the valve cover free of dirt, any loose paint, and grease. We're blasting ours at low pressure in the cabinet, but a wire brush and some elbow grease also works. Now we're going to apply some degreaser, which not only removes the grease, it helps the paint adhere a lot better. To get a wrinkle finish that we can see and feel, we're going to use some of VHT's Wrinkle Plus. You can also use this stuff on accessory brackets and air cleaner housings and such, but the main thing is to lay it down in a crosshatch pattern. First, we'll spray it vertically. Now you want all the coats to be even and pretty heavy. After 5 minutes, we lay down the next coat in a horizontal pattern. And after another 5 minutes, we lay down a third coat, this time diagonally. Again, each coat needs to be relatively heavy to get the wrinkle effect. Now, don't expect to see wrinkles right away. This stuff is very slow drying and takes about 2 hours of air dry. Now, you can hurry up the curing, though, by putting it in the oven at 200 degrees. We've heard of guys using hair dryers, but we're going to try the old heat gun. Make sure you're moving the gun around and heating the surface evenly. After a couple of minutes, the wrinkles will start to spread across the surface. Well, finally, it's time for the artistic icing on the cake. Take a sharp blade and carefully scrape away the paint on top of the fins lengthwise. Use the same technique on the letters. Follow that with some 120 grit sandpaper and use a hard block to make sure you stay on top of the surface. This will give the fins and letters a machine look. Well, what do you think? Not too shabby.
Now, BHT recommends you wait 48 hours before reinstalling the part. Meanwhile, you got the satisfaction of saving some money and coming up with your own custom creation. That's double good.
The Shaker hood is synonymous with Mopar performance, and today on Detroit Muscle, we'll show you how to custom build one for our highly modified Challenger. Then we'll show you how to install a retrofit steering column.
In the glory days of Detroit Muscle, hoods not only covered high-performance engines, they made a statement. A functional one when they scooped up cold air. This AMC had a massive ram air scoop mounted to its hood that was pretty efficient. And we assume the built-in tack was too. And this scrambler scoop? Well, never mind. How about this Roadrunner? A fairly plain hood till you flip the switch to reveal a mean air grabber with teeth. But by far the most iconic hood belonged to Cudas and Challengers that sported the functional and famous Shaker. As for our own Mopar project Ultraviolet, a 1970 Challenger that we've been giving the Hemi treatment, well, we said from the start, it's been destined to have a Shaker of its own. Like the one sitting on this Challenger's 446 pack. Of all the 4 hood options in 1970, no doubt about it, Shaker takes the cool factor cake.
Just in case you've been living up under a rock and don't know why that scoop's got the name Shaker, this is why.
Now, since we want our Challenger hood to shake like that, and Shaker hood parts are kind of hard to find, we figured Ted Stevens would be the man to help out.
We ought to be able to fill in the blanks on some of the missing parts here, and we'll have a little lesson on how this thing works.
Man, I'm excited.
Stevens Performance in Anderson, Alabama is an all Mopar restoration resource that deals in repop pieces as well as new old stock. If you need a piece for your Plymouth, Dodge, or Chrysler, they've got it. Because in addition to reman parts, they also operate the world's largest Mopar salvage yard, with 60 acres of cars to resource from. We've switched cars on you guys to this yet-to-be-restored Cuda. And this thing being a Hemi, well, it's a pretty close representation of what we're going to be doing on Ultraviolet.
The Shaker hood was optional on the Challenger with the Hemi, standard on the Cuda with the Hemi. The flaps inside the Shaker scoop, which allow the cold air in, are operated by a cable that has a handle inside the passenger compartment. It's a simple cable operated system. Pull the cable from inside the car. It's connected to this cable with a bell crank on the side of the adapter ring. You pull this is actually in the hot position here, or with the cold door closed. Then when you pull the cable, it switches it, closes the hot door, opens the cold door.
So what do you mean by hot door?
Well, the hot door is where it breathes when the Shaker scoop is closed. It works off of a cable, opens that flap up, breathes through a hole in the adapter ring.
So this is just a big flap for the fresh air side?
Correct, that's called the cold door. Okay, there's a couple of holes in the bottom of the Shaker scoop that where the water collects, drains through these holes and out these drain hoses.
Regardless of the car wrapped around it, the standard Hemi carb equipment was this dual quad Carter setup. The trick is that the throats on these are smaller than the ones on our dual throttle bodies, and our engine's been moved back. So we'll have to modify an aftermarket base plate to make it work. Well, during the Shaker sermon, I was busy back in the Stevens Performance inventory and check out what I got. Hard to find back seat for the Challenger, refurbished hood hinges, some side mirrors, and hey, what do you got, buddy?
I got one of those sweet Shakers that everybody wants. So I've been busy too, so get off my back.
Okay, well, let's load this stuff up and head them on and get them out.
Yes, sir.
Where are we going?
I'm going this way.
This way? Yeah, these are going to work fine. Well, our Challenger now has hinges for the hood. As far as the Shaker goes, well, that's going to be a lot more complex, especially considering our engine and intake combination.
Yeah, we've got a couple pretty big problems. One of them, well, the throttle bodies are too far apart to fit this stock-looking base plate. And the engine's been moved back and down to make the car handle better. But what that did is change the location of the shaker. So that's going to be a pretty big task making all this stuff work.
Now, bottom line is, it's all got to fit in here. This is a reproduction hood from Classic Industries with the shaker hole already cut out along with bolt holes.
Now for the moment of truth. We need to use the hood to position the shaker assembly on the top of the engine. Once we get everything in place, it will tell us just how extensively we need to modify the base plate to make everything work.
And on another note, remember, this is just an aftermarket base plate. There's no way in heck you'd want to modify an original Hemi piece to make it work. So hey, don't send us any emails yelling at us, all right?
Well, let's see how far off we are, Joe.
All right, here we go.
Yeah, that's a pretty decent amount.
I'd say so.
Still ahead, it's modifying that shaker base plate to work with all those custom components to make sure it looks good and works great.
We are back. Tommy's getting ready to fab up a solution to our shaker fitment issues. But first, I'm going to do a little tweaking on our base plate that'll help us out now and down the road. This thing is actually two plates in one. The inner plate is stationary, but we can move the outer plate around in different directions. That's all thanks to this crazy long washer here and the square hole. Now, the idea is to get about 1/4 inch of room all around the stud. That will maximize our adjustment potential. And once you got enough all the way around, you can go ahead and tighten down the nuts.
We still have to tie this shaker, well, to the throttle bodies. And the way we're going to do that, we're going to make a couple of sheet metal rings, cut a big hole right here where it needs to go, put them rings in place, tack weld the base plate to the rings, and fill up all of our big gaps. It's that simple.
Simple.
Not that simple. With a couple of strips cut out, each around 3 inches wide by about 17 inches long, we can begin using the slip roller to shape them into rings that will serve as throttle body mounts. We'll make several passes through the roller, tightening it down a little each time to make the curve on the steel sharper. If you don't have access to a slip roller, you can use something round like a coffee can, or shoot, one of those Christmas cookie tins to form the shape of your rings. We just about got our rings made, and what you're looking for is a 5 1/8 inch diameter. Now, if you get them close, that's cool. You can just bend that thing up, put your clamp on it, measure it, and see how much more you need to go, if any. Now, we're right at 5 3/16, so we need to tighten it up about 1/16. And you want to make sure to measure this on the inside, not the out. Yes, sir.
Slicing through both layers like this allows you to butt up the ends of the ring and weld them together. Be sure to clamp them together so your ring stays in proper shape while you weld.
With it welded together, we can go ahead and dress it up real quick like with a grinder. Get it lined back up?
Yes, indeed. Let's trade.
All right.
Yeah, and if we take these and line them up over the throttle bodies and make marks, we'll know exactly where to cut.
Joe got exactly where we need to cut all mapped out. Now we just need to grab his body saw, get to cut.
Now, cutting out a big chunk will be easier and faster in the long run. You could whittle at it in small pieces, but since you're not skipping around any braces or anything like that, you can just chop it out. The spot welds that hold on these brackets need to be drilled out, since they'll be relocated to hold the plate in place. There's going to be some welding involved, so knock the paint off the area that's getting welded. Oh, and don't forget the backside.
Now we can take the plate and check it to see how well it fits to the throttle body. Turns out we're in good shape, left to right, front to back, but vertically, well, She needs a little more work. Well, we're definitely getting closer, but the shaker still needs to come up just a little bit, about a ½ inch in the front and 3/4 in the back. Because originally, it's got a weather strip that goes around that base, and we want it to seal off properly.
We'll use some wooden blocks to shim the assembly up to the proper height. Then we can tack the rings we made to the base once we know the placement is correct.
With our rings tacked into position, I need to fill this big hole. And the way I'm going to do that is I fabbed up this little piece of metal that's simply going to slide over top of the ring and be welded into place. On the back side here, a couple of pieces will fill in the gaps that the big one didn't quite cover. With everything burned in, the tops of the rings can be cut off to bring them down level with the plate. Then we'll grind down everything nice and flat so that we don't interrupt the airflow into the throttle bodies. A couple of washers will act as shims for the crossbar, which we need to bring up just a bit so the lip on the throttle bodies can be inserted into the tubes and seat correctly. Well, that pretty much takes care of the base plate. What do you think, Joe?
Excellent work, my man, excellent work. Now, you might have noticed in the past few minutes the steering column poking out of the firewall. When we come back, we'll backtrack and show you how we made it happen. Hey, we got one more component to mock up on our Challenger, and it's this retrofit steering column from iDidit. Now, it requires no modification to install. In fact, it bolts up to a manual power or rack and pinion. Now, it comes with their easy Everett keyed ignition, all the wiring we need, and all the underdash hardware, starting with this mounting plate. It bolts to the firewall with the lip of the plate facing the engine side.
Here's a little tip for you. It's always a good idea to kind of cover up your shab before you stick it through the wall. You don't want it to get any of those boogered up spots or scarred up or anything. If you lay down about 1 foot of tape just above the bottom, that should be enough to protect the column from scuffing. Next, slide the load plate onto the column with the lip facing the wheel side and slip the O-ring up against the load plate. This will hold the load plate up out of the way while we slide the column in. Then we can attach the column onto the dash using a couple of bolts and washers from the kit. After sliding the load plate down to the mounting plate on the firewall, we'll use a couple more bolts and washers to cinch it down. Well, alrighty guys, we've got the steering column installed without a hitch. Now I need to order up a set of headers so I can finish making that steering shaft.
You're right, we're on our way. Of course, when we install this thing for real, we'll wire it up and, we got to get our noses into the catalog and find a steering wheel for it.
Catalog, really?
Online catalog, okay?
Oh, okay, buddy, okay, jeez.
Today on Detroit Muscle, we've got to plant over 550 Hemi-powered ponies to the pavement in our ultraviolet Challenger. So we're going to show you how to make some big tubs to contain some serious rubber.
Hey guys, we're back on our 70 Challenger Hemi car, Project Ultraviolet. Now we're getting close to the end of the road as far as sheet metal fabrication, but there is one more task that we're going to do, and that is widen out those wheel tubs. The reason we got to do that, well, the tires that we're planning to put under this thing are considerably bigger than stock. Let me show you. Now these are a set of Nitto Invos, and with about 13 inches of rubber touching the ground, well, it should give us plenty of traction. And these are considered to be a high-performance tire, but they have been engineered to cut down on the road noise. And what that means, when you stretch this dude out on interstate, it's still going to be a nice, comfortable ride.
In order to make them fit under the Dodge out back, we're going to have to fab up our own version of mini tubs. We'll start with these factory replacement inner wheel housings from Classic Industries and use them in conjunction with what's already under the car. The result will be Plenty of clearance for the new meats and a modification that looks fairly neat.
So our plan is to cut out some of this original tub. We're going to slice it somewhere right through here and then come and slice it under here as well. That way when we install that new tub, we can slide it in closer to that inner rail, get us that clearance that we're looking for.
Of course, that revolves around the size of the wheels, tires, and the offset of the wheels. Our Challenger wheels aren't in yet, but we can keep trucking because we already know their offset. Now, that term offset can be a little confusing at first, but here's something to clear the air a little bit. One thing to know is that a manufacturer might say a wheel is 12 inches wide, but that measurement is from the inside of the lips. So from outside to outside, it'll be closer to 13 inches. Then you have to account for the offset. If it mounts in line with the center line, it's 0 offset. To move the wheel outward, you want negative offset. To move it inward, positive offset. You won't find a bigger example of negative offset than this monster truck wheel, about 2 feet of it. On the other hand, this wheel we got from the storage room has positive offset, which creates backspace. Backspace is the distance from the back lip to the mounting flange.
The guys at Schwartz Performance have already done some of the homework for us. I tell you, that's one nice thing about having a prefab chassis. They told us that a 19 by 12 inch wheel with a 6.5 inch back spacing will fit under here with a slight mini tub. So I had to do that measurement just to see how slight that mini tub was really going to be. So when we move this closer to that should give us about an inch clearance.
Like we said, the plan here is to use as much metal as we can from both the stock tubs and the replacement tubs to widen the compartment out to the frame rail. The stock ones are spot welded in, so a few pilot holes will get us started on drilling those out. Then we can move on to the spot weld cutter and begin detaching it from the car. After that, an air hammer is the tool of choice for removing the metal. Then we can grab the body saw and cut along the line that we drew earlier. There's a brace behind part of the tub where it connects to what would be the back seat and package tray. We don't want to cut that, so we'll buzz around it. Then be sure to hit your cameraman with a piece of metal. Oh, sorry, Ken.
After you get him a bandage, continue cutting around the brace to free up the inner part of the tub. A cutting wheel can make a shallow enough cut to let you stay out of the brace. Looks like we need the air hammer again. We're ready to start trimming on the lip to install that wider tub. We're going to move this in about 1.5 inches or so. Now we are going to have to cut into that sub rail just a bit, so we need to make sure that we come back and weld that trunk floor to the side of that rail, because you don't want to compromise any of the structure that this car's got built into it.
This frame rail angles outward as it extends toward the rear, so the cut we're making won't follow the same line. When we left you, we had just cut off the lip that we'll use to attach the new tub on our Challenger. But before we can do that, we need to make sure this section of the floor is still well attached to the car. So we'll burn it down to the frame rail for good measure. A little cleanup work, and she's good to go.
Well, we're getting close to welding our tub, but we have to have something to attach it to. So I'm going to use this old piece that I removed, trim it back a little bit so that I can use the tab back on the car. That way we can kind of recycle. And I don't have to make another one. Well, I got both my pieces all ground down and dressed up. Went ahead and put on some welding paper to keep from burning up or melting any of those pretty parts. And what my plan is, lay this thing into here, use a welder, sew it back together. The nice thing about doing it this way, whenever I drill in a few holes into that tub, I can spot weld them back and it'll look very similar to stock. We've got a gap to fill between the two pieces, but a small piece of steel inserted between them will do the job nicely. With the strips tacked in, we'll go ahead and weld them solid all the way across. Then clean everything up with a little bit of grinding. All right, guys, it's time for some more spot weld drilling. So you're probably pretty excited. Well, maybe not so much. What we've got to do is remove this small bracket because it's in the way of that wheel tub, but you want to save it because you're going to have to reattach it, make sure those hinges work properly. Okay, now the next thing we need to do is cut this lip off. Now originally, the two tubs spot welded together right here at this lip, but it's kind of in the way for what we're doing, so it's time to make some racket. Well, let's see how close we really are. Little clamp here. Well, this thing fits nice. We just have to do a little bit of trimming here on this front edge and back here on this kind of the dog leg, if you will. The lip is a little bit excessive, so we're gonna have to trim it back because we don't want that much hanging off.
For the new spot welds that we'll be using to hold the tub on, a hole punch is super handy to get the piece ready for installation. A few Clecos are also a great way to hold the tub in place until we get it permanently attached. Oh, and be sure to use a body hammer to close that gap between the pieces.
One last thing that we need to do is reattach this bracket that we removed from the trunk hinge that attaches it to the wheel tub. A few marks will show where the brace's footprint is on the top of the new tub. Then we'll knock off the paint in preparation for welding. Some holes for some spot welds and a couple of clamps, and then we can weld it down.
Side by side, well, you can see that our new tubs add just enough width to let the wheels work. Yet it will look a lot closer to factory than a set of fabricated ones.
Well, that pretty much does it for the passenger side, but I still have a little bit of work to do. I've got to tackle the driver's side. Now, having those original style replacement tubs sure did save me a boatload of time, because otherwise, I've been making them things out of flat stock.
Today on Detroit Muscle, it's time for Project Ultraviolet to live up to its name. Learn how one of the top painters in the nation lays out some Mopar graphics.
So far on our 70 Challenger Project Ultraviolet, we've brought in some real heavy hitters like Jeff Schwartz from Schwartz Performance, who helped us install one of their G-Machine chassis. Then Russ Flegel from Indy Cylinder Head built us an all-aluminum Hemi for the old Dodge. So in keeping with that spirit, we're turning the body and paint work over to one of the best in the business.
You've seen us work with Chris Ryan before. He's the guy that built this incredible 53 Cadillac root beer float. along with his team at Ryan's Rod and Custom in 96, South Carolina. He also lent us a hand on our giveaway Monte Carlo, as well as our giveaway Bandit-style Trans Am.
What we're going to do is take the body back to the shop. We're going to evaluate the metalwork that's been done to it, straighten up anything that needs to be done. Turn it back. I think the stripe's going to be the most difficult part to lay out of it. We've kind of got some open rein to lay out the stripe. Oh, it's going to be an awesome car. I mean, a 70s Mopar with a 426 in it's iconic.
Welcome to South Carolina, home of Ryan's Rod and Custom. These guys work on everything from pre-war restorations to muscle cars and street rods. The team has been real busy getting the Challenger prep for the paint work that's soon to come.
The metal work was pretty well done. We straightened it up a little bit, and any other imperfections, we coated it with 4 coats of poly primer and continued more block sanding. And block sanded and block sanded and block sanded. What we have here is a copy of the rendering. You can see the white graphics on the side of the car. So our first step of this process is to spray this whole section here with the white base.
The paint scheme for this car was designed by Dale Swanson at Dale Swanson Artworks, and he really knocked it out of the park for us, incorporating classic Mopar styling cues with a custom touch.
This is the mid coat. This really doesn't have a lot of pigment into it. It's just basically an inner coat clear that's carrying the pearl itself. This is what's going to give it the pop, the pizzazz on top of that white. The next thing we're going to do is mix up our DBC 500, which is basically just a clear base, a base with no pigment in it.
Now, this isn't clear coat. There is a difference between the two. The reason for using this clear base is because it will function to protect the pearl coat from the tape that's going to be used to mask off the white. Then we got to wait for it to cure so we can tape it.
What we're going to do is set the hood on the car right now. It's important when you're painting pearls or metallics that you have the piece oriented as it would be sitting on the car. Now we're raising it up slightly just so we can get good coverage on the edge. We're getting ready to lay down the graphics on Project Ultraviolet. We're going to use this yellow tape here as more of a measuring device. As we lay it on the body line, it'll give us perfect 3/4 distance to lay up our actual stripe tape. Get the bottom done.
This green masking tape gives a sharper paint line than the yellow tape does, so that's what gets used to create the graphic. Once the edge is laid down, the yellow tape can go away. Another piece of the yellow tape is used to make a 3/4 inch split in the graphic, creating the 2 lines.
Chris is measuring to make sure that the lines will be even. After all, you can't be too particular when it comes to paint. An alternative way to do these graphics is to paint the car purple first, then mask the whole thing off, leaving the stripe area bare and spraying it white. But that involves a lot more taping.
As we look back at our rendering, we can see that they put a Detroit Muscle logo on the quarter panel. We wanted to replicate that on our graphics. So we went to our local vinyl guy and we had him cut out an exact duplicate of that rendering. What we're going to do is position our graphic on the quarter panel. We're going to stand back to make sure we're all straight. Pull back the covering. right, we're getting ready to prep the Carolina Violet paint that was custom mixed by our friends at Single Source in Nashville.
We considered a few different names for the shade of purple, which is a much more metallic and slightly more vibrant variation on the classic Mopar color Plum Crazy Purple. We decided on Carolina Violet because, hey, it's getting painted in South Carolina, so why not?
After multiple coats, the base has to dry just a bit before the tape can be pulled. So it's time for another break.
Ring the bell.
This is the big reveal, where we get to see how the graphics turned out. Looking pretty good. Now the clear coat can be laid down. And after 3 coats, voila.
We get this thing out in the sun and that Carolina Violet really pops. And those graphics that we duplicate the rendering, they look like they could have came straight out of a 70s Mopar with just a little bit of a twist. I think the car came out awesome. I love the updated look of a classic Mopar.
Stick around and learn the A to Z on rebuilding a Hot Rod Royalty transmission. Today on Detroit Muscle, we're gonna break it down to the basics as we show you how to do a grill rescue on a 45-year-old Mopar. Then we'll do some sound deadening along with finally revealing all of Ultraviolet's bling.
After loads of metal work and a G-Machine chassis, our 550 horsepower Hemi Challenger Project Ultraviolet is wearing its awesome new Carolina Violet paint that got sprayed on at Ryan's Rod and Custom.
And we got our aluminum Hemi and 6-speed transmission dropped back into our old Dodge. Now it's time to be looking at some of the pieces that we're going to have to reinstall onto it.
Yeah, we can't wait to see it with goodies like the grill back in place, bumpers, maybe some badges, and even wheels and tires.
But we can't get ahead of ourselves. Some of these pieces need a little bit more love before they can be installed onto the car. Case in point, this grill. We've got to do a little bit of repair work. Now, there are companies out there that offer a brand new grill for a 70 Challenger, but repairing ours, well, it's going to save us a boatload of cash. The main problem we have on this one is someone upgraded to one of those fog lights from back in the day, but now we've got a big hole we got to fix. And these bolts are metric. On a 70 Challenger, now this old grill, it's made out of aluminum, and this hole could be welded up, but a lot of you guys probably don't have access to a TIG welder or one just shoved off into the corner. So I'm going to show you a way to make the repair that's strong and durable. So what we're going to do is use some of this metal bonding adhesive and one of these small aluminum discs, put some of that goop on it, and then glue it to the bottom side, then come back and fill over top of it.
The surface where we'll be planting the adhesive has to first be prepared with a grinder to give the adhesive some good mechanical tooth to grab onto. This stuff is for panel bonding, which means that it's a slow curing variety. But because of that, we can count on it having a lot of strength.
We'll place our patch panel over the hole, then work it around a little bit to get it to latch onto the surface really well. Clean up any extra adhesive around the panel. Then on the top side, we want to get rid of any excess that's sticking out of the hole. Well, we've let our epoxy cure for a bit, and we need to go back in and grind out the excess with this little carbide bit. Now, you don't want to use the epoxy itself as the filler, because what happens is that stuff will shrink and it will create a divot, and your repair will show back up.
Once the bulk of it is ground out, we'll switch to a square-edged bit, which will allow us to create a 90-degree angle against the patch panel. Then we'll use the grinder to prep the surface for some body work.
With that taken care of, the next thing we're going to do is disassemble this grill.
We'll turn the pressure way down on our blasting cabinet and get to work cleaning up the surface. This soft aluminum doesn't require a ton of pressure to get it debris-free.
All right, guys, we're ready to start the bodywork process or applying some filler. Now, one thing you want to keep in mind is choose the correct filler for the application. Meaning with us, we want to make sure that it adheres to aluminum, and we're in good shape.
Next up is some epoxy sealer primer, which will get sprayed onto the entirety of the grill pieces. After that, you can spot prime the repaired bits with some filler primer. Why would you do that? Well, we'll show you.
All right, guys, we got our primer sprayed on, and I noticed we have a few small imperfections that need a little bit of putty. It's no big deal. That's what that stuff's for. Then we can sand this thing and be ready for some color. Some Duplicolor Guide Coat will help us finish up the bodywork on this thing. Then we'll grab a bucket, block, and some 500 grit to wet sand it down to absolute perfection.
Then another pass with that sealer primer will give us a uniform coat to keep the paint looking good.
Still ahead, we finish the grill rebuild and then get to work putting the shiny bits back on the Challenger. Stick around.
All right, guys, our sealer's all flashed off and we're ready to spray on our first coat of paint. What we're going to start with is kind of a platinum silver because we're trying to duplicate that anodized aluminum that this grill came with from the factory.
It's especially important when spraying high metallic colors like this to have a nice uniform coat underneath to prevent the paint from looking stripy or splotchy. That's why we laid down that sealer primer. Next up, we're planning on two-toning this grill with the color break right along the same line as what they used in the factory.
A little bit of masking is all it takes. Then we'll bust out a coat of Argent Gray, which is a factory Mopar medium gray color. The contrast between this and that sparkly silver is going to look good when it's all done. With our two colors applied, we need to remove this tape so that we can spray on some clear.
Pulling the tape low and away from the tape line helps keep the uppermost layer of paint from lifting. We're going to use a flat clear coat on this piece, which will look great once it's mounted on the front of that Challenger.
After a fresh coat of paint and some elbow grease, this thing turned out pretty sweet.
Yeah, I'd say so too. It looks as good as original, maybe better. You know, it's always great when you got the time and talent to restore something like this, but there are other situations to deal with. Come on, let me show you something. Well, we all know how bumpers take a beating, and if yours need a lot of metal work to get them back into shape, probably better off going the replacement route. These replacements come from Classic Industries, and well, they're made just like the originals down to the thickness of the metal and test fitted, so we know that they work. Now, we'll get to work installing ours after that grill goes in.
We've been waiting for this moment for quite a while. We're gonna get to see what this big bad Mopar looks like with some of its eye candy attached.
We've sprayed the headlight bezels with the same two-tone color scheme as the grille, and we can also set the shaker in place, along with the hood, to get a look at the front of the car, which is looking pretty good.
This is also a good time to do the same thing to the back bumper as well as the tail lights. Now that's a nice looking rear right there. Tell you what.
After the break, it's time to quiet this Mopar down. Well, only in the right ways anyway.
Okie doke, we're ready to move on to our next project on Ultraviolet. Now we've got most of the big shinies bolted on this thing, but now our next step is going to be putting in some sound and temperature control.
Well, we've showed you several different ways to accomplish that, from using a spray to a good old jute mat. Well, this time we're taking a different route. You see, DEI offers a complete thermal acoustic kit for small to medium interiors and one for full-size cars. Each kit comes with some of this new lighter boom mat damping material, a can of boom mat spray-on for those hard-to-reach places, and this undercarpet light that you use with the other two. Now, in case you're asking yourself, how do I know that stuff really works? Well, I am not a professional drummer, but I'm playing one on TV with two cymbals, same size, same sound. Now, I'm going to put a small piece of boom mat on this cymbal. Let's check the difference. You won't make much music with this cymbal, but it does make a difference in sound deadening.
Now here's a little tip for you guys. This stuff right here will just about stick to anything as long as it's clean and dust free. Now it may not look like it, but we've washed this floor with some hot soapy water and let it dry. So now we're ready to put this stuff on.
Be sure to push it down into the crevices on the floorboard to maximize the effect. Typically, 35 to 50% coverage of a given area is adequate to achieve the desired effect and keep your car nice and quiet. We're also using this handy roller we got from DEI to help get the mat laid down as nicely as possible. Be sure to cut out the holes for things like mounting seats while you're at it.
It can also be a big help to put some on the roof. A couple of sheets will go a long way in preventing noise from the top side. With our boom mat laid down on the inside, we're going to move on to the more difficult to reach areas like the inside of this door. And we're going to use their spray-on material.
A few other good places to use the spray-on boom mat are trunk interiors, fender wells, quarter panels, and under the package tray. It makes taking care of those areas a lot easier. So finally, we can lie down this undercarpet light material. It covers the boom mat and the entire floor, and it's the last thing to go in before the carpeting. Here it is. You ready to do some slicing?
Sure, why not? We're going to make some relief cuts in this undercarpet light in order to allow it to lay down against the floor in a more uniform manner. It'll still do the job just fine, but fitting it like this is essential for a nice looking interior. Later down the road, we also will be using some of DEI silicone-coated header wrap to control the temperatures under the hood, and there's a pretty good chance we'll be using some of their speaker baffles. These things protect the speakers and also improve the sound by eliminating any unwanted vibrations.
Coming up, we'll finally pull the curtain to reveal the Mopar's wheels.
Okay, our old Challenger's really starting to come together with the grill, bumper, and a lot of trim in place. Well, now it's time to consider something that probably defines the styling and personality of a car more than anything: wheels and tires.
When we set out to find the right wheels for this car, we talked to our chassis builder, Jeff Schwartz, at Schwartz Performance about what would work best with the brakes that he incorporated into his chassis.
With massive 6-piston calipers and 14-inch rotors all the way around, we've got some serious stopping power. But that means we needed some serious wheels to fit them. Originally, we set out to find oversized rally-style wheels, but we've decided to take a cue from our chassis and move on to something a little more modern. After a good deal of scouring on the internet, we came across a wheel designer and manufacturer that had just the thing to meet our needs. Amani Forged is based in Tampa, Florida, and they offer dozens of awesome designs, all available in multiple color configurations.
They've got 10 sizes available, from 19-inch all the way up to the 34-inch range. So they can hook you up with the perfect wheel no matter what project you're building, even off-road.
Well, here's what we came up with for the Mopar. Check it out, 19-inch Amani Tremendo Concave. Fancy name, but it's a 3-piece forging that should work perfectly with those big brakes on our Dodge. Now, these things measured 9 inches wide up front, 12 inches out back to create quite a footprint, and lay down a ton of rubber to give us traction. We've wrapped them in Nitto Invos that we showed you a while back, which is a luxury sport ultra high performance tire that blends performance and comfort into one outstanding package.
With a combination of that chassis, those brakes, and these tires, we should be able to put plenty of that Mopar power to the ground. And that old car should drive like it's on rails. Only thing we need to do now is plug it in the hole and see what it looks like.
No doubt about it, these wheels were a good choice for the Dodge. And check out that footprint.
Well, our Challenger sure has made one heck of a visual transformation today.
Been a good day indeed, Tom. And we still have a few things left on our punch list, but you know what? We're getting darn close.
Today on Detroit Muscle, Project Ultraviolet is ready for a fully custom fuel system installation, as well as a shiny front assembly and cooling setup. We'll take a look at another less appreciated Mopar geared more towards distinguished tastes and how to paint in custom logos for that extra touch.
How do you feed a hungry Hemi? That's the question we answer today for our 70 Challenger, and we'll show you how to install a high-end fuel system on your street machine. From the get-go, we decided there was only one way to push our Dodge down the road, with Hemi power. Of course, our all-aluminum power plant needs some juice to fire those 556 ponies.
We're running a dual throttle body setup on this engine, so we've decided to employ a dynamic fuel system. Now that's just a fancy name for a system with a bypass regulator and a return feed. Traditionally, muscle cars had what's known as a deadhead system, which means that a mechanical fuel pump pulled the fuel from the tank, which fed the carburetor with 7 to 10 pounds of pressure. Problem with this setup is that the original style mechanical pump will never produce the pressure required for a fuel injection system.
On our Challenger, we need a good 60 PSI at all times to feed that dual injector setup. So we're switching to an in-tank electric pump, which feeds the 2 fuel rails that supply the throttle bodies. In addition, employing a return feed back to the tank keeps the pump from being under a high constant rate of pressure. In addition to keeping the fuel cool, it helps extend the life of the pump. Here's a cool way to keep your stock appearance while still meeting the needs of modernized power plants. It's from the Resto mod line at Rick's Tanks, and well, here's Rick himself to tell us why it's a good one.
This tank is a direct fit application based off of stock dimensions with a couple of added in features. One of them being the notched front corners for extra exhaust clearance when you run in the bigger exhaust tube diameters, and the other one is the ability to incorporate an in-tank fuel pump.
Well, like this one you brought in.
This is our new billet in-tank pump module. It's got an integrated baffle reservoir. It has a return line provision, which always keeps the baffle reservoir full, a main pump provision, and also a port for an auxiliary pump should you decide to fuel high horsepower applications or just simply have a redundant pump.
Well, a lot of guys, Rick, are running a newer style crate engine, well, like the LS3, that doesn't require a return line.
Yeah, that's right, Joe. In fact, this setup right here is an OE style module, which is set up for a single line feed, commonly referred to as a deadhead system. This module right here is internally regulated. We have various regulators for various pressures. This particular regulator is a constant 58 PSI. One cool thing about this pump right here, Joe, is the ability to adapt these corner pickups. Hold those for a minute, will you? That you simply connect it with the push lock fitting as such. Then what you do is you take these corner pickups and you insert them to the left and right corner pickup brackets. So with the pickups installed, you simply place the module down in there. One of the advantages of the fuel pickups in the corner is the zero starve situation. They actually open and close depending on the presence of fuel, which is really great on the autocross course.
Good point.
Rick's Tanks has been working on the Resto Mod line for applications of the most popular of the big three. Problem is this big old sway bar here. It's not in the same location as in stock form, so we had to come up with a different solution.
Well, here's our very shiny solution, and Rick, I know you guys have been hand-making custom tanks like this since day one. What was your approach to this deal?
Basically working with Tommy, in conjunction with Tommy, we designed a tank that was off of the stock dimensions, front to back, side to side, and even the depth. The only difference is that we swept the front corner back about 6.5 inches to clear the sway bar tube. This tank has 2 baffles that go front to back and 2 that go side to side. What happens is you have a fuel pump reservoir. In a dynamic system, when you're returning fuel back, you keep a column height of fuel higher than the rest of the level of the tank when the level gets low.
This, by the way, is the same fuel pump you saw earlier, minus the baffle can, which you don't need with the internal baffling, right?
That's correct, Joe. You'll also notice that there's a provision here for a second fuel pump should you need to support a high horsepower level above 900.
I think Tommy's trying to tell us something. We better get this thing under the car.
Sounds good.
The fuel pump install starts with a rubber O-ring. Then you drop the pump in place and install the retainer ring, which needs to be tightened clockwise. We can also tie in the output line as well as the return feed with some number 6 AN fittings from Earl's.
A transmission jack makes placing the tank a snap. Then the 2 retainer straps that came with the tank can be bolted in using the factory locations. That shiny tank looks absolutely great under the old Dodge, but there's more to be done, including plumbing the lines up to the engine.
More AN fittings screw into our hose ends. We'll use some Earl's assembly lube to ease the installation as well as preventing the marring of those aluminum threads. Then the feed line from the pump is attached to the fuel rail for the injectors.
Downstream from the rail, our regulator, which is attached to the frame rail, gets tied into the system.
Well, man, it looks like you finished up our fuel system for us.
Yeah, all you gotta do is put some gas in it.
Well, we got a little bit more that we're gonna have to do before that Hemi makes some noise.
Well, I'll let you get after it.
After the break, we've got some more pretty stuff to plug into our purple Hemi-powered Challenger, including the pulley setup and cooling system.
We've got our fuel system buttoned up on our Hemi and we're ready to move on to what keeps this thing cool and what drives the accessories. Now originally this thing would have came with a V-belt setup, but these things require some maintenance and they're very prone to being thrown off because they don't run the tensioner that the later model serpentine belts have.
We're going to give our Challenger some 21st century accessory drive science with this setup we got from Summit Racing. It not only looks fantastic, it's designed to be efficient as well. Here's some of what it includes: a reverse rotation water pump from Edelbrock, 105 amp 1-wire alternator, and a power steering pump. It comes with ARP hardware, and get this, all the bracketry and pulleys are polished billet aluminum. Finally, to spin those components, a 6-rib serpentine belt.
First up is to install and correctly position the water pump studs. We'll dab them with some Loctite silicone sealant as insurance against any water seeping past the threads. Then we need to see how much each stud sticks out past the pump and adjust them accordingly. Perfect.
Then we can place the gaskets for the pump and slide it on for good. Since we're bolting steel bolts into an aluminum block, some anti-seize is a good idea to prevent any galling. The kit comes with a few of these threaded spacers that position the brackets. The first one goes in place as the guts of the water pump are also installed. Be sure that you go over and tighten all of your fasteners to spec.
This is the support bracket for your tensioner, and it gets installed next with another one of those threaded spacers and a bolt. Then our power steering bracket can go into place with another bolt up top as well as one of those spacers. Well, Mr. Joe, you're doing one fine job, but if you don't mind, I'd like to do the honors of bolting on this ginormous shiny piece.
Okay.
You don't mind?
No, let's see how many fingerprints you can get on.
I bet I can get more than one.
There's a myriad of bolts that hold this main bracket on. Install them loosely for now to allow wiggle room for installing the alternator. Leaving them a little loose also helps you get the power steering pump installed. Now the tensioner itself can go to its home on the bracket that we install, as well as the tensioner pulley.
With the main bracket bolts now tightened down, we can install the rest of the pulleys, including the one that bolts up front to our balancer. The last big shiny piece, the water pump pulley. Now for a serpentine belt. You know how this goes. Loop it like the diagram in the kit shows, use the tensioner to seat it, there you go.
Well, with that shiny serpentine system in place, we can move forward in the engine bay to handle our cooling needs for the Hemi. Summit Racing sent us this direct fit aluminum radiator that comes with all the mounting brackets we're going to need, plus a pair of 13-inch puller fans, a couple of wiring harnesses with 40-amp relays. What you got to do is loosely install these brackets onto the fan. Now I say loosely because you have to leave room for them to be draped over the radiator. They have a lot of adjustability. Just get your fans placed how you want them and cinch everything down. With that, it's ready to be mounted in the car almost.
Now originally our car would have came with a downflow style radiator, but this upgraded unit has the cross flow. And with that being said, they changed up the mounting locations on the radiator. This thing is actually supposed to sit on top of the frame rail. And us having that aftermarket chassis, we had to back up and repunt just a little.
Why don't you show them what you did?
The new radiator was designed to mount in this area at a 90-degree angle, but our new frame horn, well, it's more closer to a 45. So our solution was to take one of these urethane bushings, kind of cut it up a bit, and then simply slide all this stuff back together, getting us back to 90 degrees. And that also gave us an isolator to mount the radiator on. It's a simple matter of slipping the radiator down into place and bolting it to those pedestals we just showed you. With that done, we'll use these brackets provided in the kit to fasten down the top of the radiator and keep everything where it's supposed to be. The attention to detail one gives to a vehicle, well, it can determine how nice it is. So we're always trying to go above and beyond with the stuff that we build, kind of like our purple Mopar, for example. Whenever we got our chassis from Schwartz Performance, it came with the red brake calipers on it. But that red color doesn't really go with anything on this old car. So we went the next step further. What we did was spray on some of that Carolina Violet that we put on the body. That purple paint turned out great, but we wanted to carry our detail even further. If you notice on the brake caliper, there's an engraving of Schwartz Performance. And we thought if we painted that silver, man, it'd be great looking. So you could do this with some tape and a razor blade, but that's a whole lot of time. Or you could even do a paintbrush, but my big fat fingers don't really work that well. There is another option though. What we're going to use to get us there is this Duplicolor Scratch Fix all-in-one. Now obviously this thing's for fixing nicks and scratches and that kind of thing, but it's going to work great for our application. This white tip is actually an abrasive prep tip. You use it to roughen up the surface that you're going to be painting, which allows the paint to get good adhesion to the surface. Then we'll go over it with some wax and grease remover to make sure we're working with a clean canvas. Now with it sanded, we're ready to start painting, and we're going to use this little part of the tip that's a lot like a fountain pen.
The paint comes out as soon as you apply pressure to the tip. The harder you push, the faster it flows out. Go nice and slow, and remember how your kindergarten teacher told you to color inside the lines.
Well, that's all it is to it, and it only took about 5 minutes. Now on the other end of this pen, they do have some clear coat just in case you wanted to top coat it, but for the effect that we're going for, don't really need it. So now all we have to do is let that thing dry.
Well, needless to say, getting glass in our 49 Ford today was a good piece of progress. You could say, though, that we saved the real pain in the glass for last. Talking about our Challenger, of course. And starting with the doors here, these are a special challenge considering the shape of the glass and the design of the mechanism.
Working with door glass can be pretty intimidating because there's a whole lot of little bitty pieces to it, not to mention the regulator, the brackets, and all that adjustment that goes on. So we cut up this old junk door to show you guys how it all has to play together.
Yeah, we're going to try to reuse most of these larger components, but there are scores of little plastic pieces for hardware that are just too brittle and old to reuse. So in addition to providing the old demo door here, Stevens Performance turned us on to these replacement pieces we'll need to install all of our glass, beginning with this rear quarter piece.
First order of business, we have to get these metal pieces off.
The chrome trim comes off first, which consists of removing these 2 screws and a spring. Now the bottom piece of hardware is held in place with some 45-year-old adhesive, so it takes a little more persuasion. We've marked where it was to replicate the placement on the new glass. We'll be saving the screw, but chucking the old plastic hardware.
We'll use those marks on the old piece now to locate where the bracket goes, then put just a bit of Loctite weather strip adhesive into the channel. Once the window is attached, some acetone will remove the extra adherent.
Well, before we can put the glass back in this stock molding, we're going to add a piece of replacement seal to it. Now, the tendency first time you do this is to kind of poke it in like this, but you'll never get there. Doesn't matter if it's a Ford, GM, or Mopar, you got to thread it in, sort of like you would a windshield wiper blade. These also have a couple of tabs to keep the seal from sliding out, which you use to pierce it and then fold the tabs down. No need for sticky stuff to attach this. If you remember, it used screws. Now be sure to reinstall that spring, which keeps the seal tensioned against the glass.
We got some replacement plastic pieces, but this particular one is in pretty good shape and it's riveted on, so it's really not worth the investment to replace it. However, this one has a bolt just simply attaching it, so we'll go ahead and swap it around. Well, we got our quarter window installed and it kind of just fell into place, and oftentimes it doesn't happen that way, but we had to go ahead and get it in because it kind of determines where that other one has to be. Now we need to move on to the regulator to the door because that's what's going to hold the glass.
Well, we got most of the hardware cleaned up in the blaster, and here's a tip for you if you do a window project like this yourself. This channel gets lubricated at the factory, which is all well and good, but over time that grease collects dirt and grime and, well, it hardens up, and before you know it, one of these guides gets bound up and, well, makes for a bad window deal.
Another problem like Joe was just telling you guys about, well, the roller itself is either damaged, broken, or missing off the regulator. Luckily for us, they make a replacement, but it comes with the ball stud already installed. And this particular one requires a special tool to install it into the regulator. So what we did was remove that ball stud, so we're going to use the existing stud on the regulator. So a tip for you is to simply boil them. What that does, it makes the plastic a little more pliable and reduces the chances of damaging or breaking it.
Okay, you ready?
Yes, sir. It's a little warm.
Up next, it's the joy of making that window mechanism actually work. You might need some bandages.
Well, now the question is, will the Challenger's glass go in as easily as the Ford's did? It's a totally different kind of challenge, and well, let's see if Tommy's up to it.
One of the toughest parts of this install is getting the regulator into the door and all the pieces in position and ready to receive the window. The feet for the vertical channels have to be installed separately, then the channel toward the front of the door. We'll roll the regulator down and start slipping the glass into place. The roller has to be slipped into the channel we installed. Then we can fasten the channel itself down.
Now the other channel can go in, sliding the roller at the rear of the window into place as it goes. It then attaches from the bottom of the door. Then we can marry the guide to the rear glass bracket and roll the regulator down to attach the front of it. A little WD-40 white lithium grease on these guides as they go in will help keep them working smoothly. And attaching the hardware somewhat loosely will allow everything to be adjusted. Lastly, a fastener at the top of the window for the rear channel.
Finally, we got the last piece in, and I want to warn you, expect a few nicks and cuts and maybe some bruises, because inside of this door, there's a whole bunch of sharp spots, burrs, and that kind of thing. And if you get frustrated, don't be afraid to walk away and just cool down. I need a break. Now, oftentimes, whenever doing a job like this, actually installing the glass inside the door can be the easy part. Adjusting the glass so that it seals properly, well, that can be the real pain in the tail. And this door, it's got about 5 different ways it can be adjusted, so this is how you would do it. One of the adjustments you can do is slide these feet in or out, and that adjusts the top of the glass. Another one of the adjustments can be these little pads. Now, what this can do is make the glass a little closer to the door skin or pull it away, and it also can work as a pivot depending on how the feet are adjusted. And then you have these little stops in here, which adjust how high you can roll up the glass. There is a front and rear stop to this thing, so just in case you needed to pitch the glass one way or the other. Now, this type of adjustment can be very complicated, so just keep adjusting and you'll finally get it. That's what I do.
Hey, glad you joined us. I think you will agree our 70 Hemi Challenger Project Ultraviolet here is looking, well, ultra pretty. But it's a classic case of beauty being skin deep, literally. You see, we got the paint and most of the trim taken care of, but the interior, well, in a word, it's looking bare.
We had to wait till we had our wiring all squared away, and we're pretty much there. But before we can throw in all that carpet and other upholstery, there's one more issue that we have to address. We had to widen out our tubs to accommodate our larger wheels and tires. And in doing so, we may have invaded the space normally reserved for the rear seat. So what we need to do is set the seat frame inside of the car and just see if they simply fit. If they do, great, we can send them out and have them recovered. If they don't, well, I guess we're going to have to cut them up a bit. Here you go, big guy.
Okay, let's see what we got here. What do you think?
It's too early to tell.
Yeah, the only problem is here on the corner where it hits the well.
A little cutting required. Let me
little
get the
cutting required. Let's see about the bottom.
All right.
Okay, maybe we'll get lucky. I think we did. What do you think?
That's better than the top one for sure.
Yep, well, here we go.
So what we're gonna do is pretty straightforward. We're gonna make us a relief cut right about here and another one up top, and then just bend this over, weld it back together.
The good old body saw is a fine choice to make these mods, starting with a couple relief cuts to allow the metal to bend. Then we'll chomp through this spot to detach it. We'll torque this tab out of the way, then we can start pushing the corner in. A little more trimming to allow for another bend, and we can straighten out the curve a little, then get it clamped down. A few hammer blows will allow us to really move that metal into position.
Now a smaller set of locking pliers will hold the corner in place while we move over to the other side. This one is a repeat of the procedure we showed you the first time around. You'll want to do that so your frame maintains symmetry. No need for a wonky looking seat here.
Of course, before you weld, you'll want to test fit your modifications.
That'll do it.
Once you're happy, burn it all back together.
With the rear seats all taken care of, it's time for us to move to the front.
Well, for the front seats, we wanted a little bit more support, comfort, and, well, racy styling, so we opted for these bucket seats from Classic Industries that are a universal design, and of course they come with their own slider assemblies. Now, they work with some cars, but as is the case with a lot of older aftermarket applications, well, going to take some modifications to work with our Mopar.
Whenever mounting a set of seats, there's a few things that you want to keep in mind. One of them is placement. You don't want the seat sitting up way too high, and you don't want it sitting way too low. Second thing, you don't want the top of the seats to be leaning in or out, because looking front to rear of the car, well, it just looks plain right silly. The third thing is safety. You'll be mounting it to the floor, and we all hope that nothing ever bad happens, but if you're involved in an accident and the seat comes out, oh, that's going to be really bad. Our aftermarket seat brackets are made completely opposite than what originally came in our Mopar. The bracket tab on the front is vertical, where the floor of our car, well, it's all horizontal. But to get there from here, what we're going to use is a couple of these angle iron pieces, a little bit of welding and grinding. We'll have it fixed up in a jiffy. Well, we're going to set the seat just flat on the floor, and I'm going to try it on to see how it fits. Well, it feels like we're at the right height. We just need to get it all leveled out, and we'll be good to go.
Let's start by leveling it out. Once we have a good idea of how it needs to sit, the first bracket can go into a front mounting hole on the floor. Then, working off that, we can level it again and insert the bracket into the other front hole. We'll clamp that into place now and onto the rear.
Since the seat is already leveled, the back brackets will be easier to deal with. We'll just need to make sure it's still where it's supposed to be when they're bolted on. Since it looks good, we can go ahead and tack the mounts to the existing seat brackets. One last thing that we're going to do is connect the front and rear L brackets with this flat bar that we fashioned up. Now, that's just 1/8 inch thick by 3/4 flat bar, and once we weld them in place, it'll give those L brackets a little bit more structure.
After the break, we'll show you a secret trick for cleaning corroded copper contacts. Stick around.
Hey, we are back and ready to get busy on the centerpiece of our Challenger's interior, the dash. Now, we are replacing the stock panel with this 6-gauge setup we got from Summit Racing. Now, Classic Thunder Road makes these things with 3 different finishes: matte black, carbon fiber, and this brushed aluminum like we got. Now, of course, you get the 6 custom gauges with this thing and a wiring harness to make everything work. One cool thing about this setup is the ease of installation. The gauges bolt into place very easily. Just make sure they're straight in the housing. Then the harness comes with pre-labeled wires that takes the guesswork out of getting it plugged all together. Well, it goes without saying, installing the wires on the gauges here on the bench makes life a lot easier. Now all we have to do is plug the harness in under the dash once we get this thing in the car. Well, from new parts to old parts, these are some we salvaged off the Challenger to reuse. Things like, well, this little trim piece and remember ashtrays? First of all, though, we got to get them cleaned up.
We like to use some Duplicolor wax and grease remover for this type of project because it removes the grime without being too harsh. If you get too aggressive with your cleaning agent, it can actually eat into the plastic. A small brush is also handy for the tiny crevices like you see on this knob.
The metal pieces, specifically the ashtray, can be tossed in the blasting cabinet and blasted clean. Well, I guess these things are clean enough for some paint work, and speaking of that, could you help out?
I believe I can handle that, Mr. Joe.
Okay, I gotta clean up this old dash.
Alrighty. Well, the first thing what we're going to do is start spraying the...
It's okay, I'm all right.
To rejuvenate our old pieces, we're going to be using some of this Duplicolor trim paint. Now it'll give us that nice, even semi-gloss black that a lot of those components came with. This trim paint works on both plastic and metal, which is good because it will keep our pieces looking the same. Now while all that stuff is drying, we're going to move on to our electrical components. Now, one thing that's not too cool about our old Mopar is you can't buy replacement switches unless you find new old stock. And whenever you work with these old ones and the car's been sitting for a while, we know that them things corrode and kind of tarnish and they don't work properly. But there is a way to save these old jewels. Using a simple meter, turning it to the continuity setting, we can test this switch. Now, I don't know what position the switch is in at the moment, but we ought to have some form of some type of beeping right now. Let me cycle the switch, see if anything changes. Make sure that works. Yep. Well, we're supposed to have more of those terminals hot than what we got, so it needs to come apart. This can be the scary part, but with a little patience and finesse, you can get it apart without breaking it. Take a look at that nasty old grease on those contacts. We'll need to clean these little copper dudes up too. Well, our contacts definitely don't look the greatest. The brass ones are all gooey, and these copper ones, well, they're far from a new bright shiny penny. Now to clean all this stuff up, I'm going to use something that you can find in your refrigerator, probably, and that is some lemon juice. We're going to wipe off all this old dielectric grease to get it out of the way so it'll clean up a lot better. Our 2 copper contacts. And for fun, we're going to see how it cleans up these old pennies.
It doesn't take long for the pieces to start bubbling in our juicy solution. After about 4 hours, we'll see how well this idea works.
After letting it sit for just a bit, let's pour it out and see what it looks like. Well, you can see they look a whole lot better than they did before. Now we're just going to take a little bit of dielectric grease from Loctite and reapply it to the contacts. All right, let's see if it works. That must be parking light. The headlight circuit. That fixed it. Well, fixing that switch wasn't that big of a deal, and it probably saved us 50 or maybe even $100. In all reality, only thing it cost us was the lemon juice. And now the wife's yelling because I used it all up.
Today on Detroit Muscle, it's a big day for our purple Hemi-powered Challenger, Project Ultraviolet. She's out for her maiden voyage, and we're taking her straight to the track, where we'll show you how to set up G-Machine suspension.
When we started to work on our 1970 Dodge Challenger, it was barely more than a rusty shell. She had to take a trip to the blaster so we could start from absolute zero.
And the first thing to be replaced was the roof, which was the first of many sheet metal panels. For a chassis, it was one of the best, a Schwartz Performance G-Machine platform that would completely revolutionize the way this car handles. After that, there were a lot more panels to replace.
Meanwhile, in Indianapolis, a monster Hemi was being brought to life. And we backed it up with a 6-speed along with a dry shaft from Dan's Driveline.
And with some modification, the shaker became the next piece to fit in the puzzle.
Then we had to make room for some huge new wheels and tires by altering the rear tubs.
In South Carolina, she got the paint job of a lifetime. In a tribute to Plum Crazy Purple, we call Carolina Violet.
There were still lots of pieces that had to be fixed or replaced, like the grille and bumpers.
Finally, she was ready for wheels and tires, so we could get a look at the stance. Then a custom fuel system to light a fire in that big Hemi.
A few more custom touches to set it apart from the crowd, along with replacing and rebuilding the entire interior, one piece at a time. Daggone, Ultraviolet is ready. Hey guys, we took us a field trip up to Bowling Green, Kentucky to the NCM Motorsports Park. It's a beautiful new track and they're finishing up the final touches as we speak.
That's right, and the weather's so beautiful today, we figured we'd do this Challenger some justice with some track time. Time to do a little shakedown run just to get her broken in, right? Even with completely unadjusted suspension, she's already light years ahead of where the handling would have ever been on this car from the factory.
All right, guys, we got our cone set up and we've got some pretty big plans for today. So we brought in a guest, Brian Finch. You all have seen him on the show before. He's helped out a lot with our projects. Brian, first thing today, what should we do?
Well, with any new build, the first thing we want to do is baseline this car, right? Go out, put some lap down, take some times, take some measurements, and start adjusting, see if we can make it faster.
You've seen him on our shows before. Just in case you forgot, let me tell you about Brian Finch. He's a professional autocrosser from Tennessee that knows exactly what it takes to push one of these cars to the limit. He's also the owner of Finch Performance, offering a variety of speed parts to get the maximum out of a car's capabilities.
Next one, so you're always wanting to look a turn or two ahead to put your car in position.
He's going to give us a rundown of how to handle this course.
Stay nice and tight. There you go. Another 180. Back around this way.
He's also gauging the performance of the car. For example, he noticed our front tires are pushing in the corners a bit.
There you go. Straight ahead up here. Go ahead and short shift in a second. Back and forth.
Oh, that jam, huh?
A course like this takes a little getting used to, but after a couple of laps with Brian, you get a lot more confidence, as well as a better feel for the car. That includes Brian too. He takes a couple of spins to get the feel for what the car is doing. And for what we'll need to do to improve it. After everybody had some seat time, it gives us a picture of what the car is doing.
While it's fresh off the course, the first thing to do is check the tire temperatures in a few key spots. And once that's all done, we're headed to the pits.
Coming up, we're gonna dive under that purple Mopar and get to work setting up the suspension. Check out how a few tweaks can make a huge difference.
Hey, we're back with our Challenger at NCM Motorsports Park in Bowling Green. And we're going to take the data we gathered on the autocross course and use that to make some adjustments to our chassis. We're going to put her on the scales.
First thing we want to do before we're going to scale a car is make sure the tires are all the same pressure all the way around, because so much as a half a pound difference in a tire can really affect the scale readings.
How much can it affect it?
I've seen, where at the half a pound, you can be 20, 30 pounds more pressure forcing down on the scale in that corner. All right, looks like 3,530 pounds.
What do these numbers mean and how's this going to help us?
What we're looking at right now is we're going to check the corner weights of the car, right? So we've got it on the scales, we're going to look at the front to rear bias, we're going to look at each corner's bias. Ideally, what we want to get is a true 50-50 corner weight, cross weights on the car, and we want it with the driver in the car because that's the way it's going to be out there on the track running. All right, so what we're looking at here, right, we've got our left front, right rear, left rear, etc. The weights are just being displayed. Right now, we're showing that we're 54.7, 54.8 roughly weight to the front. That leaves us, of course, 45 roughly in the rear. So we know we got a lot of front end weight. When we start looking at the actual corners, we start looking at our cross weights. So now we know we're 47.53, so our cross weights are a little bit off. We're going to go and make some adjustments to the corners and get this thing 50-50.
Now, where the car was driving out there, it was pushing in the corners. So we measured the temperature of the tires, and on the outside, they were higher or hotter. So that means our camber is off.
Yeah, it looks like we're about 1 degree positive camber. So tires tilted out, we need to get it tilted in.
Among the 3 most popular alignment terms is camber. the angle of the wheel when viewed from the front of the car. If the top leans out from the center, the camber's positive. In from the center, that's negative. Now caster is the angle of the steering pivot when viewed from the side. If the top of the pivot leans toward the rear, caster's positive. Toward the front, it's negative. Toe in is the difference between the front and back of the tires, measured in fractions of an inch. Toe in means the front tires are actually closer to each other. Toe out means just the opposite.
Making camber adjustments on this Schwartz chassis is super easy. You back out this bolt, connected to a rod that goes to the bottom of the spindle. Then undo the connecting rod on the sway bar to free it up. Then you turn this eyelet out for more negative camber and in for more positive. Normally the adjustments have to be made up here by shimming the control arms, but this setup makes it a lot easier.
Well, we've swung her 2 degrees. So we took out that degree of positive and put a degree of negative in. So good starting point.
Now before we can put the final touches on adjusting our suspension, we need to account for the driver. That's Tommy's job. So now we can go back, set our corner weights, check that off our list. You keep up the good work.
So what we're looking at here is the 4 corners of the vehicle. You can see by the right rear and the left front that we've kind of jacked the car. It's kind of pivoting on those two. So first thing we're going to do is go to the lowest weight, which is the left rear, start adjusting that up, which should put more load on the right front, balance out the car.
The way we're going to make these changes is with the adjusting rings on the shock bodies. This changes the spring tension, which adjusts the amount of load on each corner. The problem that we've got is these 2 corners are carrying a smaller percentage of the car's weight than these 2 are, so we'll adjust them accordingly.
It's 39, 40 now.
We'll reduce the spring tension a little on the corners that carry more of the load and tighten them on the lighter ones. After a series of tweaks on each wheel, we're able to balance it out to right at 50% split across each side.
Now we can go ahead and get the scales out from under the car and move on to the next adjustment, which will be toe in.
71 3/4. You can tell that we're towed in a ton. So after we've adjusted the camber, we got the suspension sitting right, we need to get the toe back out. I'm gonna put about 1/16 toe out, helps the turn in, and we'll go out there and make some runs.
We'll make this adjustment on the tie rod and we're in good shape. Now one last thing that we noticed while we were driving it is that the rear brakes were kicking in too hard. We can easily adjust that right here on the brake bias knob.
After the break, come along for another ride as we find out if those tweaks helped.
Welcome back, guys. We've got Ultraviolet out on her maiden voyage at NCM Motorsports Park. All right, so we made our adjustments. We made a camber adjustment, toe adjustment, set our corner weights, made a brake bias adjustment, and set the tire pressure. You think we're ready to go?
Yeah, car's ready, so let's go out and put it on the track.
All right, go.
Already you can tell that there's a big difference in the way the car takes these corners. Less lean, no tire push, and now we can put that big Hemi to way more use. We've easily cut a few seconds off the time it takes to make it around the course.
It actually handles so much differently from before that driving it takes a little getting used to. Again. Looks like Tom got a little excited. We'll let him take another stab at it. This time he's looking a lot better.
The clock doesn't lie, and what it's telling us is that those adjustments made all the difference in running the course faster. With more time, we could keep whittling it down even further, but this will do it for now. The Dodge ran pretty good, and it ran even better with the help of our buddy Brian Finch. I want to say thank you again.
Anytime, Tom. My pleasure.
We'll let him finish up.
Yeah.